Wyoming Territory, 1876. The Rawlings Cattle Ranch sprawled across 10,000 acres of Wyoming's most coveted grassland, a kingdom built on blood, sweat, and the iron will of the dying man who now lay inside the massive pine lodge. A kingdom without an heir, at least not one Barnaby Rawlings believed worthy of his legacy. As spring rains pattered against the windows, the old cattle baron wheezed through lungs that had been failing him for months, summoning strength to sign the papers that would seal his family's future. In Zara Jenkins's fate, Zara stood at the window of her family's modest home in Prosperity, Wyoming, watching raindrops race down the glass while her father and brothers argued behind her. At 22, with honey-blonde hair that cascaded to her waist and eyes the same deep blue as the mountain gentians that bloomed on the slopes above town, she had turned down 3 suitors in the past year. Not because she was prideful about her beauty, though many in town whispered that she was, but because she had seen what marriage had done to her mother. Love had been ground out of Eleanor Jenkins day by day, year by year, until nothing remained but a shell who did whatever Zara's father demanded. "You'll marry him and that's final." Herbert Jenkins slammed his fist onto the table. "The Rawlings name means something in this territory, and that means security for this family." "He's 58 years old, father," Zara said quietly, not turning from the window. "He's dying of consumption. Dr. Miller gives him 6 months at most." "Exactly why it's such a fortunate arrangement," her older brother Wallace sneered. "You'll be a wealthy widow before Christmas. Unless you prefer we lose the store to Cranston's debts." The family mercantile was failing, had been for years due to her father's gambling and her brother's disinterest in honest work. The debts had mounted, and now Theodore Cranston, the banker, was calling in the loans. The Jenkins name would be ruined, unless Zara married a dying man, a short sacrifice for a lifetime of comfort, her father said, his voice softening with calculation. "You've always been the practical one, Zara. Think of your mother. Think of your sister." 14-year-old Mary sat quietly in the corner, her wide eyes reflecting Zara's own fears. What would become of her gentle sister in this house of wolves without Zara's protection? "And if I refuse?" Zara asked, though she already knew the answer. Herbert Jenkins's face darkened. "Then we lose everything. Mary goes to work as a laundress at 16. Your mother and I take rooms above the saloon. And you? Well, without a dowry or family name, your options become significantly more limited." The threat hung in the air. Zara had seen the girls who worked upstairs at the Golden Nugget. Some had once been daughters of merchants, ranchers, even a banker's daughter who'd gotten herself in trouble. In the brutal arithmetic of frontier survival, a daughter was an asset to be leveraged. Zara's false belief solidified in that moment. In the Wyoming Territory, a woman's only power came from strategic sacrifice. Love was a luxury, survival was what mattered. She would sacrifice herself for her mother and sister's security. She would endure whatever came, as women had always done. "When does he want to meet me?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Meet you," Wallace laughed. "The arrangements are already made. The wedding is on Saturday." "This Saturday, 4 days from now," Zara spun from the window. Herbert Jenkins shrugged. "Dying men can't afford to wait." That night, as rain pounded the roof, Zara packed her personal belongings, her mother's handed-down brush set, 3 modest dresses, a worn copy of Jane Eyre, and the small china figurine of a horse her grandmother had given her. How strange that 22 years of existence could be contained in such a small valise. Her mother slipped into the room, face streaked with tears. "I never wanted this for you." "I know, Mother." Eleanor Jenkins touched her daughter's cheek. "A bit of advice, though you didn't ask for it. Find something of your own at that ranch. Something no one can take from you. Knowledge is power out here, Zara. Learn everything." Zara nodded, not understanding, but storing the words away like precious seeds that might someday grow into salvation. 70 miles from Prosperity, Isaiah Cooper guided his horse through the darkness toward the Rawlings Ranch. At 26, he'd spent 8 years drifting from ranch to ranch, building a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the territory. Tall and lean-muscled from years in the saddle, with dark hair that curled slightly when too long and eyes the color of pine trees in winter, Isaiah had left his family's failed Nebraska homestead at 18 with nothing but determination and an uncanny way with horses. His current employment at the Rawlings spread had lasted 3 years, longer than he'd stayed anywhere since leaving home. Something about the vastness of the operation appealed to him. A man could disappear into work here, lose himself in the rhythm of breaking horses, driving cattle, fixing fences, all without the complication of attachment. Isaiah had learned young that attachment was dangerous. His family's homestead had been built on dreams and promises, all shattered by drought, grasshoppers, and finally fever that had taken his parents and younger sister within a week of each other. The false belief that had guided him since was simple. The only way to survive in the West was to depend on no one, attached to nothing, keep moving before loss could find you again. Cooper, the foreman's voice cut through the rain as Isaiah approached the stables. Frank Weber was a square-built German immigrant with 20 years on the Rawlings spread. The old man's looking for you. Isaiah dismounted, rain plastering his shirt to his shoulders. What's Barnaby want at this hour? Wedding preparations. Weber spat tobacco juice into the mud. Old bastard's getting hitched on Saturday. Rawlings. He can barely get out of bed. Precisely why he's in such a rush to get a young wife, I reckon. Weber's laugh was without humor. Some merchant's daughter from prosperity. Family's in debt and she's the payment. Isaiah felt a flicker of disgust. And he wants me for what, best man? Wants you to fetch her, says he doesn't trust her brothers to deliver her proper like. You're to take the wagon to Prosperity tomorrow, collect the bride, and bring her back here Friday. He wants a day to get acquainted before the ceremony. Isaiah's jaw tightened. He'd seen Rawlings's temper, his casual cruelty to servants and ranch hands alike. The thought of some young woman traded like cattle to the old man's bed turned his stomach. I break horses, Weber. I'm not a marriage broker. You work for Rawlings, Weber countered, which means you do whatever he asks, same as the rest of us. Besides, this puts you in a prime position. For what? When the old man dies, and it won't be long, whoever's in the widow's good graces might find themselves moving up. Rawlings has no son, no heir, just 3 vulture sisters waiting for him to die. A young widow might need a friend. Weber's eyebrows waggled suggestively. I'm not interested in playing those games, Isaiah said sharply. I'll deliver the bride because it's my job, nothing more. Later in the bunkhouse, while rain drummed on the tin roof and the other hands snored around him, Isaiah stared at the ceiling. He'd come to the Rawlings spread because it was big enough to get lost in, because the pay was good and the work steady, because he could work with horses without the messy entanglement of human connections. And now he was to deliver a sacrificial bride to a dying tyrant. Just another job, he told himself, another reason to keep his plans to move on when spring roundup finished. This territory was getting too complicated. What Isaiah couldn't know was that the wagon ride to Prosperity would set in motion events that would challenge everything he believed about attachment, about roots, about his place in the vast Wyoming landscape. And about the power of a woman with nothing left to lose. The morning of Isaiah's departure for Prosperity dawned clear after days of rain. The distant mountains stood crisp against the blue sky, snow-capped peaks gleaming in the spring sunlight. Isaiah loaded the wagon with supplies. Rawlings had instructed him to bring gifts for the Jenkins family, a calculated display of wealth and power. Remember, you represent the Rawlings name, Barnaby wheezed from his wheelchair on the lodge porch as Isaiah prepared to depart. His once powerful frame had withered, but his eyes remained sharp with calculation. I want no complications. Collect the girl, deliver her father the payment, and return her here undamaged. Yes, sir, Isaiah kept his face neutral. And Cooper, Rawlings's voice dropped to a rasp, she's to be treated with respect. She'll be Mrs. Rawlings soon. No loose talk among the hands about her circumstances. Isaiah nodded, surprised at this hint of protectiveness from a man known for his callousness. Perhaps even Barnaby Rawlings had limits to his cruelty. The journey to Prosperity took a day and a half. Isaiah made camp alone the first night, watching stars emerge above the rolling grassland. He'd crossed this territory countless times over the years, never putting down roots, never looking back. Yet something about this particular journey felt significant, as if the land itself were holding its breath, waiting. Prosperity appeared on the horizon the following afternoon, a clutch of wooden buildings straddling the stage road, with a white church steeple rising above false-fronted stores. Like most Wyoming towns, it existed in the space between aspiration and reality, its grand name belying its modest circumstances. Isaiah delivered Rawlings's letter to the Jenkins Mercantile, where a thin, sharp-featured man read it with undisguised satisfaction. Cooper, is it? I'm Herbert Jenkins. My daughter will be ready at 8 tomorrow morning. Jenkins appraised Isaiah with narrow eyes. Interesting that Rawlings would send a common ranch hand rather than coming himself.
Mister.
Rawlings's health prevents travel, Isaiah said evenly, disliking the man immediately. Of course, Jenkins smiled thinly. Well, we're having a small gathering tonight. A farewell for Zara. You're welcome to attend as Mr.
Rawlings's representative.
Isaiah had planned to take a room at the boarding house and avoid the family entirely, but curiosity about the woman being sold into this arrangement got the better of him.
I appreciate the invitation.
That evening, Isaiah stood uncomfortably in the Jenkins parlor, nursing a glass of whiskey, while locals filed in to wish Zara Jenkins well in her advantageous match. The hypocrisy was thick enough to choke on. Everyone knew the circumstances, yet spoke as if this were a love match rather than a business transaction. He first saw her standing beside the fireplace, nodding politely as the mayor's wife spoke. Even from across the room, Isaiah could see she was beautiful, tall, and graceful, with honey blonde hair pinned simply at the nape of her neck. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, modest yet becoming, but it was the composure in her bearing that struck him most, the straight spine, the lifted chin. This was not a woman broken by her circumstances, at least not visibly. Their eyes met across the room and something passed between them, recognition perhaps of two people playing roles neither had chosen. She excused herself from the mayor's wife and approached him directly. Mr. Cooper. Her voice was lower than he expected, melodic. I understand you're to be my escort to my new home.
Isaiah nodded. That's right, Miss Jenkins.
Zara, please, she studied him with surprising directness. Tell me about the ranch.
What should I expect?
The question caught him off guard. He'd anticipated tears, reluctance, perhaps quiet resignation, not this practical inquiry. It's the largest spread in the territory, he said. 10,000 acres, hundreds of head of cattle. The main house is substantial, 2 stories built of pine logs. There are about 30 ranch hands, more during roundup.
And my future husband.
What kind of man is Barnaby Rawlings? Isaiah hesitated, caught between honesty and diplomacy. He built an empire from nothing. That takes a certain type of man. You're being diplomatic, Mr. Cooper. A faint smile touched her lips.
I appreciate the courtesy, but I prefer to know what I'm facing.
He's demanding, Isaiah admitted, expects things done his way, but he's built something remarkable. And how long have you worked for him?
3 years.
Longer than most, I imagine. Her blue eyes held his with unsettling perception. Men like Barnaby Rawlings rarely inspire loyalty. They command it through fear or money. Before Isaiah could respond, Wallace Jenkins inserted himself between them, glaring at Isaiah with undisguised hostility. Cooper, isn't it? Rawlings couldn't send someone of better standing. The younger Jenkins's breath reeked of whiskey. Wallace, Zara's voice carried warning. Just making conversation, sister dear. Wallace smiled unpleasantly. Curious what tales this saddle tramp might have about your future husband. Mr. Cooper was telling me about the ranch, Zara said evenly, which shows more consideration for my future than anyone in this house has demonstrated. Wallace's face darkened, but before he could respond, a commotion at the door drew their attention. 3 women entered expensively dressed, their expressions identical masks of calculated pleasantness. The eldest, a silver-haired woman with Barnaby Rawlings's sharp eyes, surveyed the room imperiously. The Rawlings sisters, Isaiah murmured to Zara, your future husband's siblings. I didn't expect them here. Nor did I. Herbert Jenkins hurried forward, all obsequious welcome. Mrs. Hargrove, Mrs. Bellingham, Miss Rawlings, what an unexpected pleasure. We couldn't miss the opportunity to meet our brother's bride, the eldest said, her gaze finding Zara across the room. After all, we're to be family. The predatory assessment in that gaze made Isaiah instinctively step closer to Zara. He'd had limited dealings with Barnaby's sisters, but knew their reputation, 3 widows who had married wealth and returned to the territory after their husbands' deaths, circling their brother's empire like vultures awaiting a carcass. They hate him, Zara observed quietly, and they'll hate me more.
Why do you say that?
Because I'm the final obstacle between them and their brother's fortune. She met Isaiah's surprised glance with a small, sad smile. I told you, Mr. Cooper, I prefer knowing what I'm facing. Later, as the gathering thinned, Isaiah found himself alone with Zara on the small side porch of the Jenkins home. The spring night was cool, stars impossibly bright above the town. "You didn't have to stay, Mr. Cooper," she said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "This can't be how you plan to spend your evening."
"Isaiah," he corrected.
"And no, but it seemed wrong to leave you alone with them." "The Rawlings sisters," she laughed softly. "I survived my own family this long. I suspect I can manage 3 bitter old women." "You seem remarkably composed about all this." The question he couldn't quite ask hung between them. Zara looked toward the distant mountains, silvered by moonlight. "What choice do I have? My father's debts have left us destitute. My mother and sister have no protection if the family name is ruined. I make this sacrifice willingly if it secures their future." "But marrying a man old enough to be your grandfather."
"A dying man," she corrected quietly.
"I harbor no illusions, Isaiah. I know exactly what transaction is taking place. My youth and the possibility of an heir in exchange for financial security." The brutal honesty of her assessment silenced him. "Tell me," she said after a moment, "what would you do if you were me?" The question startled him. No one had asked his opinion on anything beyond horses in years. "I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that."
"Humor me."
Isaiah considered. "I'd run, pack what I could carry and catch the eastbound stage, start over somewhere no one knew me." "Leaving my mother and sister to face the consequences," she shook her head. "That's not freedom, it's selfishness." "Maybe," he conceded, "but there are places a woman can make her own way." "Perhaps for some women, but I've made my choice." She turned to face him fully. "I will marry Barnaby Rawlings. I will care for him until he passes, and then I will ensure my family never faces destitution again." The determination in her voice stirred something in Isaiah, respect, certainly, but also a warning. This was not a woman who would break easily, nor one who would forget those who wronged her. "We leave at 8 tomorrow," he said finally. "It's about a day-and-a-half journey if the weather holds."
"I'll be ready," she extended her hand formally.
"Thank you for your honesty tonight, Isaiah Cooper. It's a rare commodity in my experience." Her hand was small in his, but the grip was firm. In that brief contact, Isaiah felt a jolt of recognition, not attraction, though she was undeniably beautiful, but something more fundamental. The recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who had learned to survive in a world that offered few choices and less mercy. As he walked back to the boarding house beneath the star-scattered sky, Isaiah found himself troubled by emotions he couldn't name. Admiration for her courage, anger at the circumstances forcing her hand, and beneath it all, a whisper of warning that Zara Jenkins was about to change everything at the Rawlings Ranch, including, perhaps, himself. The morning broke clear and cool, dew silvering the spring grass as Isaiah brought the wagon to the Jenkins home. Zara was waiting on the porch, a small valise at her feet and a determined set to her jaw. She wore a simple traveling dress of deep green, her honey-blonde hair braided and pinned beneath a modest hat. No tears, no drama, just the quiet dignity that had struck him the previous evening. Her family's goodbye was perfunctory. Herbert Jenkins accepted Barnaby's payment, a substantial bank draft with poorly concealed eagerness. Her brothers barely acknowledged her departure. Only her mother and younger sister showed genuine emotion, clinging to Zara until Herbert sharply called them inside. "Ready, Miss Jenkins?" Isaiah asked, extending his hand to help her into the wagon. "Zara," she reminded him, accepting his assistance. "And yes, I've been ready my entire life, it seems." They traveled in comfortable silence as prosperity receded behind them. The territory opened before them, rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, distant mountains framing the horizon. Isaiah found himself stealing glances at his passenger, impressed by her composure. Most women would have been in tears, facing what she was facing, but Zara sat straight-backed beside him, occasionally asking questions about landmarks they passed or the workings of the ranch. "Tell me about the horses," she said as they stopped to rest the team near a small creek. "I understand that's your specialty." Isaiah's face brightened with genuine enthusiasm. "Mr. Rawlings has the finest stock in the territory, quarter horses mostly, for cattle work, but he's invested in some thoroughbred lines too. I've been working a breeding program the past 2 years." "You love them," she observed, "the horses." He nodded, slightly embarrassed by his transparency. always have. Even as a boy on my family's homestead, I had a way with them.
They make sense to me in a way people rarely do.
Because they're honest, Zara said. They don't pretend to be something they're not.
Exactly, he looked at her with new appreciation. You know horses.
Not really. But I understand wanting something genuine in your life. She smoothed her skirt. Will I have access to the stables at the ranch, or will I be expected to remain in the house?
I'm not sure, Isaiah admitted, Mrs.
Rawlings, the old one, Barnaby's first wife, rarely left the house from what I've heard. She died before I came to the ranch.
And how did she die? Zara's question was direct. Fever, I believe.
She was older, in her 50s. He hesitated. There haven't been any women at the main house since, except for Mrs. Winslow, who comes in to cook and clean. Zara nodded thoughtfully. So I'll be entering a man's world. All the more reason to understand it thoroughly. She looked directly at him. Will you help me, Isaiah? Show me how the ranch operates. I don't want to be merely ornamental in my husband's house.
The request surprised him.
Most women of her station would be content with running the household, perhaps entertaining occasionally. The actual business of the ranch would remain firmly in male hands. If that's what you want, he said cautiously, though Mr. Rawlings might have other ideas about your role.
Mr. Rawlings is dying, she said simply. His ideas will die with him. I need to understand what I'm inheriting.
The matter-of-fact way she spoke of her future husband's death sent a chill through Isaiah. Not because it was callous, they both knew the reality of the situation, but because it revealed a pragmatism he hadn't expected. Zara Jenkins was not approaching this marriage as a victim, but as a strategic move in a game with higher stakes than he had realized. I'll help where I can, he promised, and was rewarded with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, a brief lightening of her serious expression that transformed her face.
Thank you, she said. I suspect I'll have few allies at Rawlings Ranch. It's good to know you might be one of them. They made camp that night beside a small tributary of the Powder River.
Isaiah built a fire and prepared a simple meal, while Zara arranged her bedroll on the opposite side of the flames. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead in the vast Wyoming sky. Tell me about yourself, Zara said as they sat by the fire. How does someone become a horse trainer at the territory's largest ranch? Isaiah poked at the flames, uncomfortable with personal questions. Not much to tell. Grew up on a homestead in Nebraska. Parents died of fever. Worked my way west, ranch to ranch. And no one waiting for you somewhere. No sweetheart or wife.
He shook his head. No. Never stayed in one place long enough for that.
Yet you've been at Rawlings Ranch for 3 years. Her observation was gentle but pointed. Isaiah shrugged. Good pay, interesting work with the horses.
No reason to move on yet. Yet, she repeated, so you don't see it as permanent.
Nothing is, he said, more sharply than he intended. That's the first lesson of the West. Everything changes. Drought comes, winter kills.
People live.
Zara studied him across the flames, her blue eyes thoughtful. You've lost people, not just your parents. Isaiah stood abruptly. We should get some sleep. Long day tomorrow if we're to reach the ranch by nightfall. He retreated to his bedroll, angry at himself for revealing even that much. He'd spent years cultivating a careful distance, from the other hands, from his past, from anything that might root him too firmly. Now this woman had somehow drawn out more in one conversation than he'd shared with anyone in years. As he stared up at the star-scattered sky, Isaiah reminded himself of his plan. Stay through spring roundup, then move on. The Rawlings Ranch was just another stopping point. Zara Jenkins and her strange marriage were none of his concern, but as sleep finally claimed him, Isaiah couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed detachment was about to be severely tested. They reached the Rawlings Ranch the following evening, the last light of day gilding the massive log structure that dominated the valley. Outbuildings sprawled across the landscape, bunkhouse, cookhouse, stables, barns, a small village built to support the cattle empire Barnaby Rawlings had carved from the wilderness. As they approached, Zara fell silent, taking in what would soon be her home. Isaiah glanced at her, wondering what she was thinking, but her expression revealed nothing beyond composed observation. Frank Weber met them in the yard, his weathered face unreadable as he helped Zara down from the wagon. Miss Jenkins, welcome to Rawlings Ranch. I'm Frank Weber, the foreman.
Thank you, Mr.
Weber. Zara straightened her travel-creased dress.
Is Mr. Rawlings expecting me? Yes, ma'am, he's waiting in the main house. Cooper, see to the team, then join us inside, Mr. Rawlings wants your report. Isaiah nodded, busying himself with the horses as Weber escorted Zara toward the imposing lodge. He worked slowly, giving her time to meet her future husband without an audience. The thought of that meeting, the young woman and the dying tyrant, sat uneasily in his stomach. When he finally entered the main house, the great room was silent except for the crackling fire. Barnaby Rawlings sat in his wheelchair near the hearth, blankets covering his wasted legs despite the warmth of the spring evening. Zara stood before him, still in her traveling clothes, her posture perfect. Cooper, Rawlings's voice was a dry rasp. The journey was uneventful. Yes, sir, no problems. Rawlings nodded, his sharp eyes moving between Isaiah and Zara. Miss Jenkins and I were just getting acquainted. She tells me you were most helpful. Mr. Cooper has been a perfect gentleman, Zara said, her voice carefully modulated, and quite informative about the ranch operations. Something in her tone made Isaiah glance at her sharply. There was a subtle emphasis on operations that suggested their conversations had gone beyond what he'd actually shared. Is that so? Rawlings's gaze narrowed. Cooper knows horses. The rest is not his concern. Of course, Zara agreed smoothly, but as your wife, I naturally take interest in all aspects of your impressive achievements. The flattery seemed to please Rawlings, who actually smiled, a rare sight that transformed his gaunt face. We'll have time for all that after the wedding. For now, Mrs. Winslow will show you to your room. You must be tired from your journey. A thin, gray-haired woman appeared from the shadows of the dining area. This way, Miss Jenkins. Zara inclined her head to Rawlings. Until tomorrow, then. Her eyes met Isaiah's briefly as she passed. Thank you again for your assistance, Mr. Cooper. When she had gone, Rawlings turned his sharp gaze to Isaiah. Well, your assessment. The question caught Isaiah off guard, sir. The girl, Cooper, is she as advertised? No hidden flaws or temperament, issues her father might have concealed. Isaiah felt a surge of distaste at discussing Zara like a horse at auction. Miss Jenkins seems well-bred and intelligent. Composed, even in difficult circumstances. Rawlings studied the fire. Pretty enough, I suppose. Young, certainly. Breeding stock, he spoke clinically as if discussing a mare. Her father claims she's been properly educated, can read, write, manage household accounts. She strikes me as capable, Isaiah said carefully. Good. I need capable, Rawlings's voice dropped, suddenly confidential. My sisters circle like vultures, Cooper, waiting for me to die so they can tear apart everything I've built. I need a wife who can give me an heir, or at least hold them at bay until I can make proper arrangements. Isaiah shifted uncomfortably. Sir, given your health. I'm not dead yet, Rawlings snapped. The doctors have been predicting my demise for a year, yet here I sit, and as long as I draw breath, I determine the fate of what's mine. His gaze hardened. Remember that, Cooper. I see how you looked at her. Sir, I assure you. Rawlings waved a dismissive hand. Save your protestations. You're a young man with a young man's appetites, but understand this, she belongs to me now. After I'm gone, well, that's another matter. But for now, keep your distance. The warning was clear and entirely unnecessary. Isaiah had no designs on Zara Jenkins, regardless of her beauty or the strange connection he'd felt during their journey. He valued his position and his privacy too much to entangle himself in the twisted dynamics of the Rawlings household. I understand, sir. Good, Rawlings coughed, a wet, racking sound that shook his frail frame. The wedding is at noon on Saturday. Judge Peterson is coming from town. I expect you to be present, along with Weber and a few of the senior hands, a show of respect. Of course. That's all then, get some rest. Regular duties tomorrow. Isaiah nodded and retreated from the oppressive atmosphere of the great room. Outside, the night air was clean and cool, stars scattered across the black velvet sky. He stood for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to shake the unease that had settled between his shoulder blades. A movement caught his eye, a figure at an upstairs window of the main house. Zara stood framed in lamplight, looking out across the ranch that would soon be her domain, her expression unreadable at this distance. As he watched, she raised her hand to the glass, a gesture that seemed both farewell to her old life and greeting to the unknown future stretching before her. Then the lamp went out, leaving only darkness where she had been. Isaiah turned toward the bunkhouse, reminding himself again that Zara Jenkins's fate was not his concern. He had his own plans, his own path. The fact that he couldn't quite banish her from his thoughts was merely the natural result of 2 days in close proximity. Nothing more, but as he stretched out on his bunk that night, Isaiah couldn't shake the feeling that everything had shifted with her arrival, that the careful distance he had maintained from life at Rawlings Ranch was about to collapse, pulling him into complications he had spent years avoiding. Saturday dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed an affront to the somber occasion unfolding at the ranch. Isaiah stood with the other senior hands on the porch of the main house, uncomfortably confined in his best shirt and string tie. Judge Peterson had arrived from town, along with the 3 Rawlings sisters and their assorted children, cousins eyeing each other with the calculation of competing heirs. Inside, Zara was preparing for a wedding few believed she wanted, to a man most expected to die before summer's end. "Quite the circus," Frank Weber muttered beside Isaiah as another carriage arrived, bearing Theodore Cranston, the banker who held most of the territory's fortunes in his ledgers. "More vultures," Isaiah agreed quietly. "Smart money's on the old man not lasting a month after the wedding," Weber said. "The sisters are already measuring for new curtains." Isaiah frowned. Miss Jenkins might have something to say about that. Weber glanced at him sharply, developing an interest in the bride, Cooper. "Just an observation. She strikes me as stronger than they're expecting. For her sake, I hope so. That family would eat their young if there was profit in it." The ceremony itself was brief and perfunctory. Zara appeared in a simple cream-colored dress, her honey-blonde hair arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. She stood beside Barnaby's wheelchair with quiet dignity, speaking her vows in a clear, steady voice that betrayed no emotion. The old man's responses were wheezed but triumphant, his rheumy eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he claimed his young bride. No one present harbored illusions about the nature of the union, a business transaction blessed by law and church, nothing more. Yet watching them, Isaiah couldn't help but admire Zara's composure. She played her role flawlessly, accepting congratulations from guests who surely pitied her with gracious smiles and appropriate modesty. Only once did her mask slip. As her new sisters-in-law offered their insincere good wishes, the eldest, Victoria Hargrove, leaned close to kiss Zara's cheek. "Enjoy your brief tenure as Mrs. Rawlings," she whispered, just loudly enough for Isaiah to overhear from his position nearby. "We all know what you're really waiting for." For an instant, Zara's blue eyes flashed with something dangerous, a glimpse of steel beneath the silk. "What a burden it must be," she replied sweetly, "to have waited so long already." Victoria's face tightened, but before she could respond, Barnaby called for his bride, his voice cracking with authority despite his frailty. Zara moved to his side immediately, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder with a show of wifely concern that would have convinced anyone who hadn't seen that momentary flash of fire. The reception dragged into evening, guests lingering to assess the strange new dynamic at the ranch. Isaiah kept to the edges of the gathering, observing. He noted how Zara skillfully managed her husband's energy, ensuring he rested frequently, bringing him water rather than the whiskey he demanded. She was learning already, Isaiah realized, establishing control in small ways that appeared to be mere solicitude. As darkness fell and lanterns were lit around the porch, Isaiah found himself near the corner of the house, seeking a moment's peace from the forced sociability. He was surprised when Zara appeared beside him, having slipped away from her husband's side momentarily. "You've been avoiding me, Mr. Cooper," she said quietly. "Not avoiding, just staying in my place, Mrs. Rawlings." The new name felt strange on his tongue. She smiled faintly. "My place is yet to be determined, I think." Her gaze swept across the gathering, assessing. So many interested parties, all waiting to see what becomes of me. Of this, she gestured to encompass the ranch, the empire she had married into. "What do you want to become of it?" Isaiah asked, curious despite his determination to remain uninvolved. Zara looked at him directly, her blue eyes clear and determined in the lantern light. "I want to survive it, and then I want to thrive." Before he could respond, Frank Weber approached, his expression apologetic. "Mrs. Rawlings, your husband is asking for you." "Of course," she straightened, composure returning like a cloak drawn close. Thank you for the conversation, Mr. Cooper. Isaiah watched her return to Barnaby's side, noting how she leaned down to speak softly in his ear, how her hand rested gently on his shoulder. Whatever her private thoughts, Zara was playing the role of devoted wife with consummate skill. Later, as the hands returned to the bunkhouse and guests departed for town, Isaiah found himself unable to sleep. He walked to the stables, finding comfort in the familiar smells of hay and horse. The massive breeding stallion Barnaby had imported from Kentucky nickered softly as Isaiah approached his stall. "Can't sleep either, old man," Isaiah scratched the horse's forehead. "Too much excitement for one day, I expect. Does he have a name?" Isaiah turned, startled to find Zara standing in the stable doorway. She had changed from her wedding dress into a simple dark skirt and white shirtwaist, her hair loosened from its formal arrangement to fall in a golden cascade over one shoulder. "Thunderclap," Isaiah answered, recovering his composure. "Mr. Rawlings imported him 3 years ago, best bloodlines in Kentucky." Zara approached cautiously. "He's magnificent." "He is. And he knows it." Isaiah watched as the stallion extended his head toward Zara, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. "Careful, he can be temperamental with strangers." To his surprise, Zara held out her hand steadily, allowing the horse to investigate her. Thunderclap snuffed her palm, then pressed his muzzle against her fingers with unexpected gentleness. "Well," Isaiah said, impressed, "he doesn't usually take to people so quickly." "Animals recognize kindred spirits," Zara said softly, stroking the horse's nose. "Creatures who understand captivity." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity, struck Isaiah deeply. It was perhaps the most honest thing she had said since he met her, a glimpse beneath the composed exterior she presented to the world. "You shouldn't be here," he said, suddenly aware of the impropriety, "if someone saw." "My husband is asleep," she cut him off. "Exhausted from the day's events and heavily medicated for his pain. The house is silent." "I needed air." "Still as a new bride." "Please," the word held a world of weariness. "Let's not pretend, Isaiah, not when we're alone. We both know exactly what kind of marriage this is." He could hardly argue. "Even so, your reputation is already the subject of speculation and gossip." She turned from the horse to face him directly. "But you're right, I should be more careful," she sighed, looking around the stable with genuine interest. "Will you show me the rest someday?" "The breeding program you mentioned." The request seemed innocent enough, yet Isaiah hesitated. Barnaby's warning echoed in his mind, "Keep your distance." But refusing such a reasonable request from the ranch owner's wife would raise questions he preferred to avoid. "If Mr. Rawlings approves, of course." "I'll ask him tomorrow," she said, "though I suspect he'll have little interest in my activities as long as I attend his needs." The blunt assessment made Isaiah uncomfortable. "It's late, Mrs. Rawlings. Let me walk you back to the house." She nodded, accepting the change of subject. They walked in silence across the moonlit yard, the spring night cool around them. At the porch steps, Zara paused. "Thank you for your kindness these past days," she said formally. "It has been a comfort in difficult circumstances." "I've done nothing special," Isaiah protested. "You've treated me as a person, not property or a prize." Her smile was sad in the moonlight. "That is special in my experience." Before he could respond, she ascended the steps and disappeared into the house, leaving Isaiah standing in the yard, troubled by emotions he couldn't name and didn't want to examine. The weeks following the wedding established a new rhythm at the Rawlings Ranch. Barnaby's health fluctuated, some days finding him almost vigorous, holding court from his wheelchair on the porch. Other days confining him to his bed, breath rattling in lungs that gradually surrendered to the consumption eating him from within. Through it all, Zara proved herself a capable and attentive wife. She learned the household management quickly, won the loyalty of Mrs. Winslow, and established herself as a quiet but definite presence in the main house. The hands treated her with cautious respect, uncertain what to make of the young woman who had entered their domain. True to her word, Zara convinced Barnaby to allow her greater knowledge of the ranch operations. She began accompanying Frank Weber on his morning rounds when her husband was resting, asking intelligent questions about cattle management, water rights, grazing rotations. The foreman, initially skeptical, gradually warmed to her genuine interest. She's got a good head on her shoulders, Weber admitted to Isaiah one evening as they shared coffee outside the bunkhouse. Picks things up quick. Remembers everything you tell her. Rawlings allows this, Isaiah was surprised. Most ranchers, especially one as controlling as Barnaby, kept their wives firmly separated from business matters. Seems to amuse him, Weber shrugged. Perhaps he thinks it's harmless, or perhaps he recognizes she'll need the knowledge soon enough. Barnaby's declining health was an open secret on the ranch. The doctor from town came twice weekly now, leaving with an increasingly grave expression. The Rawlings sisters visited more frequently, their concern for their brother transparent in its insincerity. Through it all, Isaiah maintained a careful distance from the main house and its new mistress. He focused on the horse breeding program, breaking new stock and preparing for the spring roundup. If his thoughts occasionally strayed to Zara, her quiet dignity, her measured determination, he quickly redirected them to safer subjects. Until the morning everything changed. Isaiah was working with a young colt in the corral when he heard shouting from the direction of the bunkhouse. Frank Weber ran toward him, face flushed with urgency. "Cooper, get to the house, quick." The boss collapsed, can't breathe. Isaiah vaulted the fence, heart pounding. "Doctor." "Already sent for, but it'll be hours." Weber grabbed his arm. "Mrs. Rawlings is asking for you specifically." Confusion mingled with alarm as Isaiah ran toward the main house. Why would Zara ask for him in this crisis? He found the answer as he burst through the door into chaos. Barnaby lay on the great room floor, face purpled, chest heaving in desperate, ineffectual gasps for air. Zara knelt beside him, her dress stained where she had clearly been trying to help him cough up the bloody fluid drowning him from within. Around them, servants hovered uselessly, and Victoria Hargrove wrung her hands in theatrical distress. "Isaiah," Zara's voice cut through the confusion, calm but urgent, "help me get him to the bed. He can't breathe lying flat like this." Without hesitation, Isaiah moved to Barnaby's side, lifting the old man's shoulders while Zara supported his head. Together they half-carried, half-dragged him to the bedroom off the main room, positioning him on the bed with his upper body elevated. "Mrs. Winslow, bring hot water and the pine resin," Zara commanded. "Victoria, please wait outside. You're upsetting him with your distress." The eldest Rawlings sister bristled. "I have every right." "Outside," Zara repeated, her voice steel-wrapped in silk, "or make yourself useful by watching for the doctor." To Isaiah's amazement, Victoria retreated, clearly unused to being directed but finding no effective counter to Zara's calm authority. Alone with the struggling Barnaby, Zara turned to Isaiah. "I need to make a poultice for his chest. My grandmother taught me. It helps loosen the congestion. Can you hold him upright while I prepare it?" Isaiah nodded, supporting Barnaby's frail shoulders as the old man fought for every breath. Zara worked swiftly, mixing pine resin, lard, and some herbs from a small jar she produced from a cabinet. "This will help until the doctor comes," she told her husband, her voice gentle but firm. "You must try to relax, Barnaby. Fighting makes it worse." To Isaiah's surprise, the old man actually seemed to respond to her, his desperate gasps slowing slightly as she spread the poultice across his chest and throat. The pungent smell filled the room as Zara worked, her movements efficient and practiced. "You've done this before," Isaiah observed. "My mother suffered winter chest ailments," she answered, not looking up. "I learned to treat them young." She positioned a pillow behind Barnaby's back. "Hold this here. The warmth and the resin will help open his lungs." They worked together in silent efficiency, Zara directing with quiet confidence. Gradually, Barnaby's breathing eased from desperate gasping to labored but more effective inhalations. By the time the doctor arrived, some color had returned to the old man's face. "You may have saved his life, Mrs. Rawlings," the doctor said after examining his patient. "Quick thinking with that poultice." Traditional remedies have their place alongside modern medicine. Zara accepted the praise with modest grace, but Isaiah noted the calculating assessment in her eyes as she watched the doctor administer morphine for Barnaby's pain. She was learning, cataloging information, building her understanding of her husband's condition and treatment. Later, with Barnaby sleeping under the effects of the morphine, Isaiah found Zara on the porch, finally allowing herself a moment of exhaustion. Her honey-blonde hair had come loose from its pins, and her dress still bore the stains of her husband's bloody sputum. "You should rest," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "It's been a difficult day." "It has," she agreed wearily. But there will be more like it. The doctor says this crisis has weakened him significantly. It's only a matter of time. The frank assessment might have seemed callous from another, but from Zara it was simply pragmatic truth. Isaiah found himself admiring her clear-eyed facing of reality. "You were remarkable in there," he said. "Most women would have panicked." "Panic serves no one," she replied, "least of all me." Before he could respond, Victoria Hargrove emerged from the house, her pinched face set in lines of disapproval. "Mrs. Rawlings, is it appropriate for you to be conversing alone with a ranch hand while your husband lies gravely ill?" Zara's expression didn't change, but Isaiah saw her spine straighten almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Cooper assisted with your brother's care when others stood useless, Victoria. I was expressing my gratitude. Nevertheless, appearances are the least of my concerns at present," Zara cut her off smoothly. "But you're right that I should return to my husband. Thank you again, Mr. Cooper." The dismissal was gentle but firm. Isaiah nodded and retreated, aware of Victoria's suspicious gaze following him across the yard. The encounter left him uneasy. The Rawlings sisters already viewed Zara as an interloper. Any hint of impropriety would give them ammunition against her. Yet as he returned to the stables, Isaiah couldn't deny the connection he had felt working alongside her in the crisis, the wordless understanding, the shared purpose. For those brief hours they had been partners in a battle against death, all artifice stripped away by urgency. It was dangerous territory, this newfound respect, and he had to admit it, admiration. Especially with Barnaby's condition deteriorating and the vultures circling ever closer. That night, as he lay in his bunk listening to the other hand's snores, Isaiah made a decision. After roundup, he would move on as planned. Find work on another ranch, somewhere far from the complicated emotions and tangled loyalties developing at Rawlings Ranch. It was the sensible choice, the safe choice. Yet even as he resolved to leave, Isaiah knew that walking away from Zara Jenkins Rawlings would be harder than he had anticipated. Not because of any romantic attachment, he had carefully avoided that pitfall, but because in her quiet strength and clear-eyed determination, he recognized something kindred. Two survivors, navigating a harsh world with the tools at hand. Two people who understood that in the Wyoming Territory, power was the only true protection. Barnaby Rawlings did not die that spring, confounding the doctor's predictions and his sister's expectations. Instead, he rallied, though never returning to his previous strength. By summer, he had moved from bed to wheelchair again, able to sit on the porch and survey his domain, if not actively manage it. The credit for his survival fell squarely to Zara. Her care was meticulous and innovative. When the doctor prescribed bed rest, she insisted instead on movement, having Isaiah build a wheeled chair that allowed Barnaby fresh air and stimulation. When traditional medicines proved ineffective, she supplemented with herbal remedies learned from her grandmother. She monitored his diet, ensuring nourishing broths and fresh milk despite his complaints. Most significantly, she became his voice in ranch operations. As Barnaby weakened physically, Zara positioned herself as his proxy, conveying his instructions to Weber, keeping him informed of cattle counts and water conditions, even reviewing contracts with his lawyer. That most of these instructions originated with Zara herself was a secret kept between husband and wife, Barnaby maintaining the illusion of control while increasingly relying on his young wife's surprisingly astute business sense. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. By midsummer, hands who had initially viewed her with skepticism or pity now removed their hats respectfully when she passed. Frank Weber consulted her directly on ranch matters. Even the banker, Theodore Cranston, found himself dealing with Mrs. Rawlings more often than her husband. Only the Rawlings sisters remained immune to her quiet accumulation of authority, their resentment growing with each week their brother survived under Zara's care. "They're planning something," Weber warned Isaiah one July evening. "Victoria was in town meeting with Judge Peterson yesterday, very hush-hush." "About what?" "Competency, I'd wager." Weber spat tobacco juice into the dust, trying to have Barnaby declared incompetent to manage his affairs, which would make them his legal guardians and effectively disinherit the wife. Isaiah frowned. Rawlings is sick, not addled. He knows exactly what's happening on his ranch. "Thanks to Mrs. Rawlings," Weber agreed. "But that's part of their argument, I expect, that she's manipulating him, making decisions in her own interest rather than his." That's ridiculous. She's kept him alive months longer than anyone expected. Weber gave him a shrewd look. Developed quite the admiration for the boss's wife, haven't you, Cooper? Isaiah's expression closed. I respect competence, nothing more. Weber didn't sound convinced. Well, competent or not, Mrs. Rawlings is in for a fight. Those sisters have been waiting 20 years to get their hands on Barnaby's empire. They won't let a slip of a girl from a failed mercantile family stand in their way. The warning pricked at Isaiah's conscience as he returned to the stables. He'd maintained his distance from the main house as much as possible these past months, focusing on the horse breeding program and preparing for the fall roundup. His plan to leave after spring roundup had been delayed, first by Barnaby's crisis, then by the foaling season that required his expertise. But the original reasons for leaving remained. The atmosphere at the ranch grew more charged by the day, tensions between Zara and the Rawlings sisters escalating from cold politeness to barely concealed hostility. Isaiah had no desire to be caught in that crossfire. Yet as he worked with the horses that evening, he couldn't shake the sense of obligation he felt toward Zara, not because of any personal attachment, he assured himself, but because of the basic fairness of the situation. She had upheld her end of the bargain, marrying Barnaby, caring for him diligently, learning the ranch operations. To have the Rawlings sisters undermine her position through legal maneuvering seemed deeply unjust. His troubled thoughts were interrupted by the stable door opening. Zara entered, her face composed but tension evident in the set of her shoulders. She wore a simple blue riding skirt and white blouse, her honey-blonde hair braided down her back, practical attire for ranch life that somehow only enhanced her natural beauty. "Mr. Cooper," she greeted him formally, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mrs. Rawlings." He set down the brush he'd been using. "How can I help you?" She glanced over her shoulder as if ensuring they were alone, then moved closer. "I need information, Isaiah, honest information that I can't get from anyone else." The use of his first name, rare since her marriage, signaled the seriousness of the conversation. "What kind of information?" "About the will." Her blue eyes held his directly. "Barnaby's will. Has he discussed it with you or with Weber, any of the senior hands?" Isaiah frowned. "That would be highly unusual, Mrs. Rawlings." "Please." "This is important." Her composure slipped slightly, revealing genuine concern beneath. "His sisters are making moves against me, against us. I need to know what provisions Barnaby has made." "I'm sorry, but he's never mentioned his will to me." Isaiah hesitated, then added, "Weber believes the sisters are trying to have him declared incompetent." Zara's expression tightened. "Yes, Victoria met with Judge Peterson yesterday. Fortunately, the judge's wife is grateful for some herbal remedies I provided for her neuralgia. She warned me." The casual revelation of her strategic relationship building impressed Isaiah. Zara was playing a deeper game than he had realized. If they succeed. "They won't," she interrupted with quiet certainty. "Barnaby may be physically weakened, but his mind remains sharp, and he's become protective of me in his way. He recognizes what his sisters are attempting." Something in her tone made Isaiah study her more carefully. "You've discussed this with him?" "Of course." A small smile touched her lips. "My husband and I have no secrets, Mr. Cooper. Contrary to his sister's beliefs, ours has become a partnership of sorts." The implications of that statement hung between them. Isaiah had assumed Zara merely tolerated her husband's presence, performing her wifely duties with resigned dignity. The suggestion that she had formed a genuine alliance with Barnaby, that she might even hold some affection for the difficult old man, was unexpected. "I see," he said finally. "Then what do you need from me?" Zara straightened, decision made. "I need an ally, Isaiah, someone I can trust when matters come to a head, as they inevitably will. The sisters are growing desperate as Barnaby stabilizes under my care. They'll make bolder moves soon." The request, or was it a warning, placed Isaiah precisely where he didn't want to be. In the center of the power struggle for Rawlings Ranch. "Mrs. Rawlings, I'm just a horse trainer. Ranch politics are beyond my—" "You're more than that," she cut him off. "You're observant, respected by the hands, trusted by Weber. And you have a sense of justice that's rare in my experience." Her gaze held his. "I'm not asking you to take sides publicly, just to be watchful, to let me know if you hear anything that might threaten our position." "Our position?" The words encompassed Barnaby and herself as a unit, the rightful authority at the ranch against outside threats. It was a clever framing, appealing to Isaiah's sense of loyalty to his employer while neatly sidestepping any suggestion of personal allegiance to Zara herself. Before he could respond, voices outside the stable announced the approach of others. Zara stepped back immediately, her manner shifting to casual inquiry as two ranch hands entered. "Thank you for your assessment of Thunder's colt, Mr. Cooper," she said smoothly. "I'll inform Mr. Rawlings of your recommendations." With a polite nod to the other men, she departed, leaving Isaiah with the unsettled feeling that he had just been drawn deeper into the ranch's power dynamics despite his best efforts to remain uninvolved. That night he lay awake long after the bunkhouse had fallen silent, turning over Zara's request in his mind. The sensible course remained clear: finish the summer work, collect his wages, and move on before the situation deteriorated further. Rawlings Ranch was just another stopping point in a life deliberately kept rootless and unentangled. Yet as Isaiah stared into the darkness, he couldn't escape the memory of Zara's direct gaze, the quiet dignity with which she faced the gathering threats against her position. There was something compelling about her steady determination, her refusal to be victimized by circumstances, something that resonated with his own history of survival against harsh odds. By the time dawn broke over the eastern ridges, Isaiah had reached no firm decision, but the possibility of leaving Rawlings Ranch before seeing how Zara's story unfolded seemed increasingly unlikely. For better or worse, their paths had become entangled, and Isaiah Cooper, who had spent years avoiding exactly such entanglements, found himself reluctantly curious about where this particular path might lead. August brought scorching heat and escalating tensions to Rawlings Ranch. The sisters' visit to Judge Peterson had indeed been about having Barnaby declared incompetent, but their initial petition had been rejected. The judge, after a personal visit to assess Barnaby's condition, found him in possession of his faculties despite physical infirmity. The victory was temporary. Within days, Victoria Hargrove had engaged a lawyer from Cheyenne, a sharp-eyed man named Preston who specialized in estate disputes. His arrival at the ranch coincided with that of Dr. Lawrence, a specialist in mental decline from Denver, clearly brought to provide the medical testimony the sisters had been unable to secure locally. "They're not even pretending anymore," Frank Weber observed as the visitors settled into the main house. "Open warfare now." Isaiah watched from the corral as Zara emerged onto the porch to greet the newcomers, her posture perfect, her expression revealing nothing of what must be significant anxiety. She had dressed formally for the occasion in a deep blue dress that emphasized her youth and beauty, a strategic choice, Isaiah suspected, highlighting the contrast between herself and the severe, black-clad Rawlings sisters. "Cooper," Weber's voice snapped him back to attention. "Those colts won't break themselves, less admiring the scenery, more work." Isaiah returned to the task at hand, but throughout the day, his thoughts kept straying to the drama unfolding in the main house. By evening, rumors had filtered out through the house staff. Dr. Lawrence had examined Barnaby at length, while the lawyer questioned Zara about ranch management decisions made during her husband's illness. "Not looking good, Jimmy," the young hand who helped Mrs. Winslow in the kitchen, reported at supper. "Doc's saying the old man's being influenced, not making his own choices, and that fancy lawyer's saying Mrs. Rawlings has overstepped, making business decisions without proper authority." Isaiah frowned. "Rawlings is still signing the documents, isn't he?" "Sure, but they're claiming she's manipulating him, telling him what to sign." Jimmy lowered his voice. "And there's talk about her spending time alone with some of the hands, improper-like." Weber slammed his coffee cup down. "That's horseshit and you know it, Jimmy. Mrs. Rawlings has conducted herself with perfect propriety since the day she arrived." "Just repeating what I heard, boss." Jimmy held up his hands defensively. "Victoria was saying it to that lawyer. Something about undue familiarity with the horse trainer." All eyes turned to Isaiah, who felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The sisters were weaponizing his occasional interactions with Zara, twisting them into something scandalous. "Mrs. Rawlings has consulted me about the breeding program, as is appropriate for the ranch owner's wife," he said evenly. "Nothing more." Weber nodded, "and I've been present for most of those consultations." "There's nothing to these accusations." "Maybe not," Jimmy shrugged, but that ain't stopping them from making them, and from what I heard, they've got the doc and lawyer convinced. Isaiah pushed away from the table, appetite gone. Outside, the evening was settling over the ranch, the western sky painted in fiery oranges and deep purples. The main house stood silhouetted against the sunset, windows glowing with lamplight. Somewhere inside, Zara was fighting for her position, her future, perhaps even her reputation, and now his name was being used against her. The realization settled like a stone in his chest. Whatever careful distance he had maintained, whatever professional boundaries he had respected, the Rawlings sisters had decided to use his very existence as a weapon. The unfairness of it burned. Acting on impulse, Isaiah headed for the main house. He would speak to Weber first, then perhaps to Barnaby himself, making clear that any rumors about impropriety were baseless lies meant to undermine Zara's position. He had nearly reached the porch when the front door opened, spilling lamplight onto the steps. Dr. Lawrence and the lawyer emerged, followed by Victoria Hargrove, her thin face set in lines of grim satisfaction. "It's settled then," she was saying. "You'll file the papers tomorrow." "First thing," Preston confirmed. "The medical evaluation provides more than sufficient grounds. Judge Peterson will have no choice but to reconsider his ruling." "Excellent." Victoria's smile was cold. "And the other matter, the suggestions of impropriety." The lawyer hesitated. "Insinuations without evidence are dangerous ground, Mrs. Hargrove. I would advise focusing on the medical and financial aspects." "But should evidence emerge? Then of course the situation changes." Preston adjusted his spectacles. "But for now, let's proceed with the stronger argument." They descended the steps, falling silent as they noticed Isaiah standing in the shadows. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she recognized him. "Mr. Cooper," she acknowledged coldly. "Rather late to be approaching the main house, isn't it?" "I need to speak with Mr. Weber about tomorrow's work assignments," Isaiah lied smoothly. "I believe he's meeting with Mr. Rawlings." "My brother is resting," Victoria said. Dr. Lawrence's examination was quite taxing for him in his condition. "I imagine it was," Isaiah replied, unable to keep the edge from his voice. Victoria studied him for a moment, then smiled thinly. "Good evening, Mr. Cooper. Do be careful about wandering too near the main house after dark. People might misinterpret your intentions." The threat was barely veiled. Isaiah nodded stiffly and stepped aside, allowing the trio to pass. He watched them walk toward the guest cabins, the knot in his stomach tightening. Their plans were advancing more quickly than he had anticipated. By tomorrow, Barnaby could be legally stripped of control over his own ranch, and by extension, Zara would lose what protection her position as his wife provided. Isaiah turned back toward the bunkhouse, mind racing. He needed to warn her to let her know what was coming, but approaching her now, with the sisters' accusations hanging in the air, would only provide more ammunition against her. As he reached the bunkhouse, a figure emerged from the shadows beside it, Mrs. Winslow, her gray hair escaping from its usual tight bun, her expression troubled. "Mr. Cooper," she said quietly. "Mrs. Rawlings asks if you might check on Thunder's colt. She's concerned about his breathing." Isaiah understood immediately. Zara was creating a legitimate reason for them to speak privately. "Of course," he said. "I'll go now." The stables were quiet, most of the horses settled for the night. Isaiah found Zara waiting beside Thunderclap's stall, a lantern turned low providing the only illumination. She had changed from her formal dress into a simpler skirt and shirtwaist, and her honey-blonde hair hung in a single braid down her back. Despite the casual attire, her face was drawn with tension. "They're filing papers tomorrow," she said without preamble, "to have Barnaby declared incompetent and place Victoria as his guardian." "I know, I overheard them on the porch." "Then you also know they're trying to implicate you." Her blue eyes were troubled in the lantern light. "I'm sorry, Isaiah, I never meant to put your position at risk." The apology surprised him. "My position isn't important, it's yours I'm concerned about." "Mine," a sad smile touched her lips. "I knew the risks when I made this bargain. I've always known the sisters would fight me." "What will you do?" Zara's expression hardened with determination. "Fight back. Barnaby and I have discussed this possibility." "We have contingencies in place." "What kind of contingencies?" Isaiah asked, curious despite himself. The less you know, the better. She glanced toward the stable door. They're already using our acquaintance against me. I won't make it worse by involving you further. I'm already involved, Isaiah pointed out. They've seen to that. Yes, Zara sighed, and I've put you in an impossible position. Perhaps it would be better if you left the ranch, found work elsewhere until this is resolved. The suggestion, so aligned with his own earlier thoughts, now struck Isaiah as wrong. Running looks like guilt, he said. Besides, I won't give them the satisfaction of chasing me off. Zara studied him for a long moment, her expression softening. You're a good man, Isaiah Cooper. Better than this place deserves. The simple statement, delivered without artifice, affected Isaiah more deeply than he cared to admit. I'm just doing what's right. Few do, in my experience. She straightened, composure returning. I should go back. Barnaby will need his medicine soon, and I don't trust the sisters not to interfere with his treatment. Zara, Isaiah spoke her name without thinking. Be careful. These people, they'll stop at nothing. I know, her smile was grim, but neither will I. She slipped away into the darkness, leaving Isaiah with the unsettling realization that he had just committed himself to whatever battle was coming, not just out of justice or fairness, but out of genuine concern for Zara herself. The admission disturbed him. For years, he had carefully avoided emotional entanglements, keeping relationships professional and temporary. Now, despite his best efforts, he found himself invested in Zara's fate in a way that went beyond mere workplace loyalty. It wasn't love, he was too self-aware to make that mistake, but it was something equally dangerous, recognition. In Zara's determined survival, her refusal to be defeated by circumstances beyond her control, Isaiah saw a reflection of his own hard-won resilience. And having recognized that kinship, he could no longer pretend indifference to her struggle. The next morning dawned hot and still, the air heavy with the promise of a summer storm. Isaiah rose early, restless after a night of troubled sleep. The bunkhouse was already empty, the other hands having departed for their daily tasks. As Isaiah stepped outside, Frank Weber approached, his expression grim. Cooper, need a word. They moved away from the bunkhouse, toward the relative privacy of the corral fence. Trouble's brewing, Weber said without preamble. The lawyer and Victoria rode out at dawn, headed for town. Dr. Lawrence stayed behind, keeping an eye on things, he says. They're filing the competency papers, Isaiah confirmed. Weber's eyebrows rose. You know about this. Overheard them discussing it last night, Isaiah explained, omitting his later conversation with Zara. They're moving fast. Damn right they are, Weber spat into the dust, and there's more. This morning, Barnaby's taken a turn. Breathing's bad again. Mrs. Rawlings is with him, but the doctor's making noises about proper care facilities in Denver. They're trying to separate them, Isaiah realized. Get Barnaby away from the ranch, away from Zara, where they can control access to him. That's my read too, Weber studied Isaiah shrewdly. You're taking a powerful interest in Mrs. Rawlings's welfare, Cooper. In fairness, Isaiah countered. She's done nothing to deserve this treatment. Fair's got nothing to do with it. This is about money and power, Weber sighed. Still, you're right, the girl's been good for Barnaby, kept him alive longer than anyone expected. Doesn't deserve to be tossed aside like yesterday's slops. So what do we do? Isaiah asked. We, Weber's eyebrows rose. You planning on inserting yourself into a family dispute, Cooper? That's quicksand and you know it. I'm already in it, Isaiah admitted. The sisters are using my name in their accusations against Zara, suggesting impropriety. Weber cursed colorfully. That's low, even for them, but it gives you all the more reason to steer clear. I can't just stand by and watch them destroy her. The foreman studied him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. You're a fool, Cooper, a well-intentioned one maybe, but a fool nonetheless. He glanced toward the main house. But I've been called worse, and I've got no love for the Rawlings sisters and their scheming. So you'll help. I'll do what I can, Weber agreed reluctantly. Which ain't much given the legal wheel's already turning, but I'll testify to Mrs. Rawlings's proper conduct if it comes to that, and I'll keep the hands in line, no loose talk or rumors. Thank you, Isaiah said sincerely. Don't thank me yet, Weber warned. This could still end badly for all concerned, including you. The warning hung in the air as they parted ways. Isaiah heading to the stables, while Weber went to organize the day's work. As he crossed the yard, Isaiah caught sight of Zara through the main house window. She stood beside Barnaby's bed, administering some medicine, her face composed but strain evident in the set of her shoulders. "Doctor." Lawrence hovered nearby, observing with barely concealed skepticism. As Isaiah watched, the doctor said something that made Zara straighten defensively. Though he couldn't hear the exchange, the confrontational body language was clear. Isaiah forced himself to continue toward the stables. Inserting himself into that situation would only make matters worse. Zara was intelligent and resourceful. She would handle the doctor as she had handled so many challenges since arriving at the ranch. Still, the image of her standing alone against the forces arrayed against her lingered uncomfortably in his mind as he set about his daily tasks. By mid-afternoon, the promised storm had gathered on the horizon, dark clouds building over the western mountains. The air was oppressively still, the ranch hands working in sullen silence as sweat soaked their shirts. Isaiah was repairing a broken stall door when Jimmy burst into the stable, breathless with excitement. "Cooper, all hell's breaking loose at the main house." Isaiah set down his hammer. "What happened?" "Victoria and that lawyer are back from town with the sheriff and Judge Peterson himself." Jimmy's eyes were wide. "They've got papers, legal papers to take control of the ranch and move Mr. Rawlings to some hospital in Denver." Isaiah's stomach dropped. "Where's Mrs. Rawlings?" "Standing her ground from the looks of it. She's got Barnaby in the bedroom and won't let them in." Jimmy grinned with undisguised admiration. "You should hear her, Cooper, cool as winter ice, telling the judge and sheriff they can wait until her husband is stabilized." "And Barnaby, how is he?" "Bad from what I heard, another breathing crisis. Mrs. Rawlings has been with him since dawn." Jimmy lowered his voice. "Some are saying the sisters might have had something to do with it, that maybe they interfered with his medicines." "That's a serious accusation," Isaiah cautioned, though the possibility had occurred to him as well. "Is Weber at the house?" Jimmy nodded. "Sheriff asked for him. Wants to know who's in charge of the ranch with Barnaby incapacitated." The situation was deteriorating faster than Isaiah had anticipated. If the sisters had secured legal control of the ranch, Zara's position was precarious indeed. The accusations of impropriety, the suggestions of medical neglect, all could be used to remove her not just from authority, but from the ranch entirely. "I need to get up there," Isaiah decided, setting aside caution. "Weber said to keep all hands away from the main house," Jimmy warned. "Doesn't want to give the impression of intimidation." "I'm not going as a hand, I'm going as a witness to Mrs. Rawlings's care of her husband." Isaiah washed his hands in the stable's water bucket. If they're claiming she's neglected him, someone needs to speak the truth. Jimmy looked uncertain but didn't try to stop him as Isaiah headed for the main house. The yard was unusually quiet, the regular rhythm of ranch life suspended as everyone waited to see how the power struggle would resolve. Dark clouds continued to build in the west, and distant thunder rumbled across the valley. As he approached the main house, Isaiah could hear raised voices from inside, Victoria's shrill with indignation, the deeper tones of the sheriff trying to maintain order, and cutting through them, Zara's voice, lower but unwavering. "My husband is too ill to be moved, Judge Peterson. Dr. Lawrence himself advised against any travel just this morning. You can verify that with him." Isaiah entered quietly, taking in the scene. The great room had become an impromptu courtroom, with Judge Peterson, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, seated in Barnaby's chair near the fireplace. The sheriff stood nearby, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic dispute. Victoria and her sisters flanked the lawyer, Preston, who held a sheaf of official-looking documents. Frank Weber stood by the window, face impassive but eyes watchful. And in the center of it all stood Zara, still in the simple dress she'd worn since dawn, honey-blonde hair escaping from its pins, face pale with exhaustion but spine straight as steel. She looked young and vulnerable against the array of authority figures surrounding her, yet somehow remained the most commanding presence in the room. "Mrs. Rawlings," the judge was saying with forced patience, "these papers grant temporary guardianship to Mrs. Hargrove pending a full competency hearing. They are legally binding. You must allow the doctor to examine your husband." "Doctor?" "Lawrence has been examining him all day," Zara countered, "and can tell you that moving Barnaby now could kill him. Is that your intention, Judge, to risk a man's life for the sake of paperwork?" The judge shifted uncomfortably. Of course not. But these allegations of medical neglect are utterly false, Isaiah said, stepping forward. All eyes turned to him. Victoria's expression darkened with recognition, while the sheriff's hand instinctively moved toward his gun at the unexpected interruption. "Who are you?" Judge Peterson demanded. "Isaiah Cooper, Your Honor. I've worked at this ranch for 3 years. I was present during Mr. Rawlings's previous medical crisis, when Mrs. Rawlings saved his life with treatments the doctor himself praised." "This is the horse trainer," Victoria said dismissively, "the one I mentioned in my affidavit. His testimony is hardly impartial given his connection to Mrs. Rawlings." "What connection?" Isaiah challenged directly. "Mrs. Rawlings has conducted herself with perfect propriety since the day she arrived. Any suggestion otherwise is a deliberate lie meant to discredit her." "Mr. Cooper," the lawyer interjected smoothly, "no one is disputing Mrs. Rawlings's personal conduct. The issue is her husband's competency to manage his affairs and her possible influence over decisions that rightfully belong to the family." "What family?" Isaiah's anger broke through his careful restraint. "The sisters who visit only when they want something, who haven't shown genuine concern for Barnaby's welfare in all the years I've been here. Mrs. Rawlings is the one who's kept him alive, who's learned the ranch operations to support him, who's actually acted like family." The room fell silent at his outburst. Zara's eyes met his, surprise and something like gratitude flickering in their blue depths before her composed mask returned. "Judge Peterson," she said quietly, "I understand your difficult position. But I ask you to consider, if Barnaby were truly incompetent, would he have survived this long? Would the ranch be prospering under his continued direction? Ask Mr. Weber about the cattle contracts negotiated this spring. Ask the banker about the loan payments made on schedule. Ask the hands about the improvements to the breeding program, all done with Barnaby's approval and understanding." The judge frowned thoughtfully, looking from Zara to Victoria and back again. "These are fair points, Mrs. Rawlings. However, the legal petition can wait 24 hours, she finished firmly. "Give my husband time to stabilize, Judge. Allow him to speak for himself, as is his right. If after hearing from him directly, you still believe he requires guardianship, I will not stand in your way." The reasonable request hung in the air. Judge Peterson stroked his whiskers, clearly torn between the legal documents before him and the compelling case Zara presented. "Victoria, your brother is genuinely ill?" he asked, turning to the eldest sister. "So she claims," Victoria sniffed. "Convenient timing, don't you think? Just as we arrive with legal authority, suddenly Barnaby is too ill to speak for himself." "Doctor Lawrence," the judge looked to the physician, who had been observing silently from the doorway to Barnaby's room. The doctor cleared his throat. "Mr. Rawlings is indeed experiencing respiratory distress, Your Honor. Whether it's a natural progression of his condition or something else, I cannot say with certainty." "Something else?" The judge's eyebrows rose. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting nothing," the doctor backpedaled quickly. "Merely noting that the timing is unusual." Zara's face flushed with anger. "You stand in my home and insinuate I would harm my husband, the man I have nursed day and night for months. How dare you?" "Mrs. Rawlings," the sheriff cautioned, "mind your tone." "I will not," Zara's voice shook with controlled fury. "I have endured suspicion, hostility, and false accusations since the moment I arrived. I have proven my dedication to my husband's welfare 100 times over, and now you suggest I would deliberately worsen his condition. It's unconscionable." Thunder crashed outside, closer now, underlining her words with natural emphasis. Rain began to patter against the windows as the storm finally broke over the ranch. Isaiah moved to stand beside her, a silent show of support that did not go unnoticed by anyone in the room. "Judge Peterson," Frank Weber spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "I've run this ranch for 20 years. Seen everything from blizzards to rustlers to range wars, and I've never seen anyone work harder for this place, or for Barnaby Rawlings, than his wife has these past months." "You're an employee," Victoria dismissed. "Paid to say what's expected." "I'm a man with eyes and a conscience," Weber corrected firmly, "and what I see is a young woman who's earned the right to be heard. 24 hours ain't much to ask, Judge. Let the old man speak for himself, if he's able." Judge Peterson sighed heavily, then nodded. Very well, 24 hours, Mrs. Rawlings. If your husband is able to demonstrate his competency to my satisfaction by this time tomorrow, I will reconsider the guardianship petition. And if he cannot, Zara asked steadily, then I will have no choice but to enforce these papers as written. The judge stood, signaling the end of the discussion. Sheriff will return to town for the night. Dr. Lawrence will remain to monitor Mr. Rawlings's condition. Victoria began to protest, but the lawyer quieted her with a hand on her arm. A reasonable compromise, Preston said smoothly. We will return tomorrow, Judge. As they prepared to leave, the storm broke in earnest, rain lashing the windows and wind howling around the eaves of the house. The sheriff looked outside with dismay. Judge, we might want to wait out the worst of this. Creek could be up already. Judge Peterson nodded reluctantly. Mrs. Rawlings, might we impose on your hospitality until the storm passes? Zara's smile was cool but impeccably polite. Of course, Judge, Mrs. Winslow will prepare the guest rooms. You'll find this house maintains traditional standards of hospitality, regardless of the circumstances. The subtle reminder of her proper management of the household was not lost on the judge, who had the grace to look somewhat abashed at the situation he had created. As the various parties dispersed, the judge and sheriff to the dining room where Mrs. Winslow was hastily setting out refreshments, Victoria and her sisters to the parlor with their lawyer, Dr. Lawrence back to Barnaby's bedside. Isaiah found himself momentarily alone with Zara near the fireplace. Thank you, she said quietly, the two simple words carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. For speaking up. I only told the truth, Isaiah replied. Truth is rare currency in this house. Her smile was tired but real. I won't forget it, Isaiah. Before he could respond, Dr. Lawrence emerged from Barnaby's room, his expression grave. Mrs. Rawlings, your husband is asking for you. Zara nodded, composure returning like a cloak drawn close. Excuse me, Mr. Cooper. Isaiah watched her follow the doctor into the bedroom, closing the door firmly behind her. Frank Weber moved to stand beside him, both men staring into the fire as rain drummed against the windows. You put yourself in the middle of it, Weber observed neutrally. No going back now. No, Isaiah agreed, I suppose not. For what it's worth, the foreman said after a moment, I think you did right. Girl deserves at least one person willing to stand up for her. Isaiah nodded, the simple validation easing something tight in his chest. He had acted on instinct, driven by a sense of justice, and something more personal he wasn't ready to examine, but having done so, he felt oddly at peace with his decision. Whatever came next, whatever the consequences of his public support for Zara, Isaiah knew he could not have done otherwise. Some principles, once recognized, could not be ignored without sacrificing essential parts of oneself. As the storm raged outside and tension simmered within, Isaiah Cooper accepted that his careful policy of non-attachment had finally, irrevocably failed. And strangely, the realization felt not like defeat, but like the first step on a new, uncharted path. The storm persisted through the night, thunder rattling the windows of the main house and rain turning the ranch yard to mud. Isaiah remained inside at Weber's insistence, helping to manage the uncomfortable détente between the opposing parties. The Rawlings sisters kept to the parlor, speaking in hushed, urgent tones with their lawyer. Judge Peterson and the sheriff played cards in the dining room, clearly wishing to be elsewhere. And Zara moved between her husband's bedside and her duties as reluctant hostess, her face pale with exhaustion but her composure unwavering. Isaiah found moments to observe her throughout the evening, the careful way she measured Barnaby's medicines, the gentle firmness with which she positioned him for easier breathing, the quiet authority she maintained despite the hostile forces surrounding her. Dr. Lawrence watched too, his clinical skepticism gradually giving way to grudging respect for her methodical care. By midnight, the storm had finally blown itself out, leaving behind the fresh, clean scent of rain-washed earth and the distant rumble of thunder moving east across the plains. The household settled uneasily for the night, the sisters taking rooms upstairs while the judge and sheriff bunked in the study. Isaiah made his way to the kitchen, intending to check if Mrs. Winslow needed help closing up before he returned to the bunkhouse. Instead, he found Zara sitting alone at the kitchen table, a cup of cooling tea before her, her honey-blonde hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up as he entered, too exhausted to maintain her usual careful guard. You should be resting, he said quietly, pausing in the doorway. So should you, she countered with a tired smile. Yet here we both are. Isaiah hesitated, then took the seat across from her. How is he? Stable for now, she pushed a strand of hair from her face. The crisis is passing, I think. He's sleeping naturally, not the drugged sleep Dr. Lawrence wanted to induce. And tomorrow, will he be able to speak to the judge? Zara's expression tightened. He must be. Everything depends on it. The simple statement encompassed the stakes, not just Zara's position or Barnaby's authority, but the future of the ranch itself. If Victoria and her sisters gained control, everything would change. The hands would be replaced, the breeding program abandoned, the carefully built alliances with neighboring ranchers dissolved in favor of quick profits. You've done everything possible, Isaiah said, wanting somehow to comfort her. No one could have done more. Haven't I? Zara's blue eyes met his directly, vulnerability showing through her exhaustion. Sometimes I wonder if I should have refused this marriage from the beginning. Taken my chances elsewhere, as you once suggested, found work in some distant town, started over. And left your mother and sister to face the consequences, Isaiah reminded her. That's not who you are, Zara. No, she agreed softly, though sometimes I wish it were, it would be simpler. The admission, so at odds with her usual determined practicality, revealed the toll the past months had taken. For all her composure, all her strategic planning, Zara was still a young woman thrust into an impossible situation, fighting daily against forces that would gladly destroy her. Without thinking, Isaiah reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. You're not alone in this, he said simply. She looked at their joined hands, then back to his face, something vulnerable and questioning in her gaze. Why, Isaiah, why stand with me when it puts your own position at risk? You barely know me. The question deserved honesty, because I recognize something in you, he said after a moment, the will to survive, to make something from nothing. To face whatever comes without breaking. He hesitated, then added, my parents died when I was 18. Fever took them and my little sister within a week. Everything we'd built on that Nebraska homestead was lost. I've been drifting ever since, never staying long enough to risk that kind of loss again. Zara turned her hand beneath his, their fingers interlacing in a gesture that felt strangely intimate. I'm sorry about your family, she said softly. That kind of loss changes you. It does. Isaiah was surprised by how easy it felt to share this history he usually kept carefully guarded. But watching you these past months, how you faced every challenge, every setback, it's reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What's that? That surviving isn't enough, his voice dropped lower. That sometimes you have to fight for more, for what matters. The words hung between them, laden with meanings neither was prepared to fully acknowledge. Zara's eyes held his for a long moment before she gently withdrew her hand. We should both rest, she said, rising from the table. Tomorrow will determine everything. Isaiah nodded, accepting the retreat to safer ground. You're right, try to sleep, Zara. You as well. She paused at the kitchen door, looking back at him with a small smile that contained equal parts gratitude and something more complex. And Isaiah, thank you for reminding me why this fight matters. He watched her disappear down the hallway toward Barnaby's room, where she would spend what remained of the night in the chair beside his bed, ever vigilant. The kitchen felt suddenly empty without her presence, the air itself heavier. Isaiah made his way back to the bunkhouse through the mud of the ranch yard, the night air cool against his face. The other hands were asleep, snores and occasional mutters the only sounds breaking the silence. He stretched out on his bunk fully clothed, too wired for sleep despite his physical exhaustion. Tomorrow would indeed determine everything, not just for Zara and Barnaby, but perhaps for Isaiah himself. He had crossed a line today, stepping into the center of the power struggle he'd so carefully avoided. Whatever happened now, there was no returning to the comfortable detachment he had maintained for years. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, Isaiah found himself strangely at peace with the uncertainty ahead. For the first time since leaving that Nebraska homestead, he had chosen to stand for something beyond mere survival. Whether that choice would lead to redemption or ruin remained to be seen. But as sleep finally claimed him, Isaiah Cooper knew he would face whatever came without regret. The morning broke clear and cool, the storm-washed world gleaming in the early sunlight. Isaiah rose at dawn, earlier than the other hands, and made his way to the main house. The yard was still muddy from the night's rain, but the air held the promise of a perfect late summer day. As he approached, he saw Judge Peterson already on the porch, smoking a pipe as he gazed out over the ranch. The older man nodded in acknowledgement as Isaiah climbed the steps. "Mr. Cooper, early riser." "Yes, sir. Ranch work starts with the sun." The judge studied him thoughtfully, tamping down the tobacco in his pipe. "You spoke forcefully yesterday on Mrs. Rawlings's behalf." "I spoke the truth, Your Honor." Judge Peterson puffed contemplatively. "Truth is often colored by loyalty, young man, and other emotions." Isaiah met the judge's gaze directly. "My observations stand on their own merits, sir. Mrs. Rawlings has been nothing but dedicated to her husband's welfare and the proper management of this ranch." "So you say," the judge turned back to the view. "I've known the Rawlings family for 30 years, Cooper. Barnaby's a hard man, brilliant in business, ruthless with competitors, generous only when it served his purposes. Not a man easily influenced or controlled." "People change," Isaiah suggested, "especially when facing their mortality." Judge Peterson nodded slowly. "Perhaps, or perhaps a clever young woman has seen opportunity in an old man's weakness." "You don't know her," Isaiah said, an edge creeping into his voice. "No," the judge gave him a shrewd look, "but I'm beginning to know you, Mr. Cooper, and I wonder if your judgment in this matter is entirely clear." The implication hung between them as the front door opened. Frank Weber emerged, nodding to both men. "Judge Cooper," his expression was guarded. "Mrs. Rawlings asks if you join her for breakfast before the proceedings, Your Honor. Mr. Rawlings had a restful night and is taking some broth this morning." "Excellent news," the judge said, knocking his pipe against the porch rail. "Lead the way, Mr. Weber." As they entered the house, Isaiah noted the subtle changes since the previous night. The parlor had been tidied, fresh flowers placed on the mantel, the lingering dampness from the storm dispelled by a cheerful fire. Zara had been busy preparing for this crucial day. She greeted them in the dining room, dressed in a simple but elegant blue dress that emphasized her youth and beauty without appearing frivolous. Her honey-blonde hair was neatly pinned, her manner composed and gracious as she directed them to seats at the table where coffee and a substantial breakfast awaited. "Thank you for your patience, Judge Peterson," she said, pouring coffee with steady hands. "My husband is much improved this morning and looks forward to speaking with you after breakfast." The judge nodded, helping himself to eggs and bacon. "I'm pleased to hear it, Mrs. Rawlings, and I appreciate your hospitality under difficult circumstances." "This is my home," Zara replied simply. "Proper hospitality is a matter of principle, not convenience." The subtle reminder of her position and her adherence to social expectations despite the challenges she faced was not lost on the judge, who inclined his head in acknowledgement. As they ate, Victoria and her sisters entered, followed by their lawyer. All looked somewhat rumpled from their unplanned overnight stay, their displeasure evident in tight expressions and curt greetings. "Is my brother able to receive visitors?" Victoria asked with pointed emphasis. "After breakfast," Zara replied evenly. "Dr. Lawrence is with him now, completing his morning examination." Victoria made a sound of disbelief but took a seat at the table, her sisters flanking her like crows on a fence. The lawyer, more diplomatic, thanked Zara for the meal before turning to the judge. "I trust we can proceed with the hearing as scheduled, Your Honor. The papers require immediate implementation once signed." "If Mr. Rawlings is capable of participating, we will hear from him directly," Judge Peterson said firmly. "I made that commitment to Mrs. Rawlings and I stand by it." The lawyer nodded reluctantly, while Victoria's expression darkened further. Isaiah, observing from his position near the window, noted the tension in Zara's shoulders despite her outward calm. Everything hinged on Barnaby's performance in the next hour, his lucidity, his command of ranch matters, his stated wishes regarding his wife and sisters. As breakfast concluded, Dr. Lawrence appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Rawlings is ready to receive visitors," he announced, "though I must caution against overtaxing him. His condition remains fragile." Judge Peterson rose, adjusting his waistcoat. "Very well, Mrs. Rawlings, shall we proceed?" Zara nodded, leading the way to Barnaby's room. The sisters followed, with the lawyer, sheriff, and doctor. Lawrence close behind, Weber caught Isaiah's eye, indicating with a slight tilt of his head that they should remain outside. "This is family business now," the foreman murmured as the bedroom door closed. "We've said our piece. Rest is up to the old man." Isaiah nodded reluctantly, settling into one of the chairs near the fireplace to wait. The minutes stretched into an hour, then longer. Occasionally, voices rose behind the closed door, Victoria's shrill with indignation, the lawyer's persuasive tones, and once, surprisingly strong, Barnaby's own raspy command. "Sounds like the old wolf still has teeth," Weber observed with grim satisfaction. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, the door opened. The judge emerged first, his expression thoughtful but resolved. Behind him came the sisters, Victoria's face flushed with angry color, her younger siblings subdued and resentful. The lawyer followed, his professional mask firmly in place despite what was clearly a setback to his case. Last came Zara, her face showing nothing beyond appropriate concern for her husband's welfare, as she spoke quietly with Dr. Lawrence. "He should rest now," the doctor was saying. "The exertion has taxed his strength considerably." "Of course," Zara agreed. "I'll sit with him." Judge Peterson cleared his throat, drawing all attention to himself. Having spoken at length with Mr. Rawlings and observed his comprehension of both his medical condition and ranch affairs, I find insufficient evidence to support a declaration of incompetence at this time. Victoria made a sound of protest, but the judge continued firmly. Mr. Rawlings demonstrated clear understanding of recent business decisions, current cattle prices, and the terms of contracts negotiated this spring. He expressly endorsed his wife's management of both his health care and ranch matters during his periods of incapacity. "He's being manipulated," Victoria insisted. "You heard what the doctor said about his condition." "I heard Dr. Lawrence confirm that while Mr. Rawlings's physical health is indeed compromised, his mental faculties remain intact," the judge countered. "And I found no evidence of undue influence or manipulation, despite the allegations in your petition." "This is outrageous," Victoria turned to her lawyer. "We'll appeal, of course." "You may certainly pursue that option," Judge Peterson said mildly. "Though I would caution against continuing to make unfounded accusations against Mrs. Rawlings. Such claims, if proven false, could constitute slander." The warning was clear. Victoria's mouth snapped shut, though her eyes burned with undimmed hostility as she glared at Zara. "Thank you, Judge Peterson," Zara said quietly. "I know my husband appreciates your fair consideration of this difficult matter." The judge nodded, then turned to the sheriff. "I believe our business here is concluded. Shall we return to town?" As the various parties prepared to depart, the judge and sheriff to their official duties, the sisters and their lawyer to presumably plot their next move, Isaiah remained by the fireplace, watching Zara. She stood straight and composed, the perfect picture of a dutiful wife concerned only with her husband's welfare. Only someone who knew her well might detect the slight tremor in her hands, the careful control she maintained over her breathing. When the house had emptied of visitors, Zara finally allowed her shoulders to sag slightly, the first sign of the immense strain she had been under. "You did it," Weber said quietly, approaching her, held them off. "For now," Zara agreed, her voice steady despite her evident exhaustion. "But they'll try again. Victoria isn't one to admit defeat." "What did Barnaby say?" Isaiah asked, curious about the conversation that had turned the tide. A small, satisfied smile touched Zara's lips. He reminded his sisters that he built this ranch from nothing while they married money and lived comfortably back east. He pointed out that not one of them could name his best breeding stock or the terms of the Cheyenne cattle contract. And he made it very clear that his wife has shown more genuine concern for his welfare in 6 months than his sisters have in 20 years. Weber chuckled appreciatively. "Bet that set their caps afire." Indeed, Zara's smile faded. But most importantly, he informed them and the judge that he has already revised his will, that regardless of when he passes, his wishes for the ranch and for me are legally protected. Isaiah's eyebrows rose. He changed his will. "When?" 2 months ago," Zara admitted. "After the first time Victoria suggested having him declared incompetent. Barnaby may be physically failing, but his mind is sharp." He recognized the threat and moved to counter it. The revelation explained much about Zara's quiet confidence throughout the ordeal. She and Barnaby had been several steps ahead of Victoria's scheming all along. I should return to him, Zara said, glancing toward the bedroom door. The confrontation exhausted him, though he'd never admit it. Weber nodded. I'll get the hands back to work. No sense letting ranch business slide, just because the vultures came calling. As the foreman departed, Isaiah lingered, wanting to speak with Zara privately, but uncertain how to express the tumult of emotions the past 24 hours had stirred in him. She solved the dilemma by speaking first. Thank you, Isaiah, for yesterday, for standing with me when it mattered. You would have managed without me, he said honestly. You're stronger than they know. Perhaps her blue eyes met his directly, but it meant something having you beside me. Having someone who saw me, the real me, not just the role I'm playing. The admission hung between them, fraught with implications neither could safely acknowledge. Zara was still a married woman, still bound to Barnaby by both law and her own sense of duty. And Isaiah was still an employee, still conscious of the power dynamics and social constraints that separated them. Yet in that moment, something shifted between them, an understanding, a recognition of possibilities that might exist beyond the present circumstances. I should go, Isaiah said finally, reluctantly. Weber will need help reorganizing the day's work after all the disruption. Of course, Zara's composure returned, the brief vulnerability tucked safely away. Perhaps later you might update me on the breeding program. Barnaby was asking about Thunder's colt. The request, perfectly proper, relating to ranch business of legitimate interest to the owner and his wife, offered a way for them to maintain contact without raising suspicions. Isaiah nodded, grateful for her practical solution. This afternoon, if that suits. Yes, I'll come to the stables when Barnaby is resting. With that arrangement made, they parted, Zara to her husband's bedside, Isaiah to the ranch work awaiting him. Yet as he walked across the yard toward the stables, Isaiah couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in his life's trajectory. For years he had drifted from ranch to ranch, keeping emotional connections provisional, his own needs simple and his expectations modest. The death of his family had taught him the pain of loss, and he had structured his entire existence to avoid experiencing that pain again. But somehow, without intending it, Isaiah Cooper had begun to care. About Zara, yes, but also about the ranch, about what happened here, about a future that suddenly seemed to matter in ways it hadn't before. The realization was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. Whatever came next, Isaiah knew with certainty that his days of comfortable detachment were over. For better or worse, he had chosen his side. September brought the first hint of autumn to the Wyoming Territory, mornings crisp with frost that melted under the still warm midday sun. At Rawlings Ranch, a fragile peace had settled following the confrontation with the sisters. Victoria and her siblings had returned to their own properties, their lawyer back to Cheyenne, leaving Zara to continue her careful management of both her husband's health and the ranch operations. Barnaby rallied somewhat after the sisters' departure, his breathing easier, his periods of lucidity longer. Whether due to reduced stress or Zara's diligent care, or perhaps his sheer determination to spite his sister's expectations, the old rancher defied the doctor's predictions once again, his hold on life stronger than anyone had anticipated. For Isaiah, the weeks following the confrontation brought both relief and a growing uncertainty about his own path. His planned departure after spring roundup had been postponed, then seemingly forgotten as his role at the ranch evolved. Frank Weber increasingly relied on him not just for the horse program but for general management, bringing Isaiah into discussions about cattle movements, hay contracts, and winter preparations. And then there was Zara. True to her word, she had come to the stables that afternoon to discuss the breeding program, maintaining a proper distance, speaking of ranch matters with appropriate interest. Yet beneath the formality, a new understanding existed between them, a connection forged in crisis, a mutual recognition that ran deeper than either could acknowledge openly. Their interactions remained carefully proper, always in the open, often with Weber or other hands present. Zara would inquire about the horses, Isaiah would provide updates, and occasionally they would discuss broader ranch matters. Nothing that would raise eyebrows or fuel the still simmering rumors Victoria had tried to weaponize against them. But sometimes, in the brief moments when no one else was watching, their gazes would meet and hold, communicating volumes without a word spoken. In those unguarded seconds, Isaiah glimpsed the woman beneath Zara's composed exterior, her intelligence, her determination, her capacity for feeling carefully contained by the role she had accepted. And he knew she saw him just as clearly, not merely the competent horse trainer, but the man with his own history of loss, his own careful boundaries built against pain. The mutual recognition both comforted and unsettled him. Isaiah had spent years ensuring no one looked too deeply, maintaining enough distance that he could always move on without regret. Now Zara saw him with a clarity that made evasion impossible, even as their circumstances made anything beyond this silent understanding equally impossible. It was this tension that occupied Isaiah's thoughts as he worked with a young mare in the corral one crisp September morning. The horse, a promising bay with Thunder's bloodline, was spirited but intelligent, responding well to his gentle persistence as he taught her to accept the saddle. "She's coming along nicely," Zara's voice startled him from his concentration. Isaiah turned to find her at the corral fence, dressed for riding in a practical divided skirt and jacket, her honey-blonde hair braided and pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The outfit was a departure from her usual more formal attire, and the sight of her prepared for the trail caught him off guard. "Mrs. Rawlings," he acknowledged, leading the mare to the fence. "I didn't expect you this morning." "Barnaby is having a good day," she explained. "He insisted I get some air, said I've been hovering too much." A small smile touched her lips. His exact words were somewhat more colorful. Isaiah chuckled, able to imagine the old rancher's crusty commands. "He's right, you've barely left the house in weeks." "Hence my appearance," Zara gestured to her riding clothes. "I thought I might ride up to the north pasture. Weber mentioned the aspens are turning early this year." "They are," Isaiah confirmed. "It's a beautiful view from the ridge." Zara hesitated, then asked with careful casualness, "Would you accompany me, Mr. Cooper? Barnaby insists I shouldn't ride alone, given how long it's been since I've been on a horse." The request was reasonable, sensible even, but Isaiah recognized the risk it represented. Being alone with Zara, away from the ranch, would feed exactly the kind of rumors Victoria had tried to spread, yet refusing would suggest those rumors had substance, that there was indeed something improper to avoid. "Of course," he said finally, "let me finish with this young lady and saddle 2 horses. The gray gelding would suit you, steady but responsive." "Thank you," relief flickered across her face, quickly masked. "I'll wait by the stable." As she walked away, Isaiah focused on completing the mare's training session, conscious of the eyes of 2 other hands working nearby. He kept his movements deliberate, unhurried, giving no indication that the upcoming ride was anything but routine ranch business. Half an hour later, they rode out from the ranch yard, Isaiah on his regular mount and Zara on the gentle gray gelding. He had chosen a route that would take them past several working areas of the ranch before turning toward the more isolated north pasture, ensuring plenty of witnesses to the proper start of their excursion. Zara rode well, her posture natural in the saddle despite what must have been limited opportunities to ride since her arrival at the ranch. They moved in comfortable silence until the ranch buildings disappeared behind them, the vast Wyoming landscape opening around them, rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush, the distant mountains sharp against the clear autumn sky. "I've missed this," Zara said finally, breathing deeply of the crisp air. Space, silence, the ability to speak without calculating every word. "You've been under siege," Isaiah observed. "In a war I never wanted," she agreed. "Yet here I am, fighting for a place I never chose, married to a man I barely know." The frank admission surprised him. Zara rarely spoke so openly about her situation, maintaining the fiction of her marriage as a conventional, if unusual, arrangement. "Do you regret it?" he asked, "coming here?" She considered the question seriously, eyes on the distant horizon. "Not regret exactly. I made the choice with open eyes, but sometimes I wonder about the roads not taken. The lives I might have lived. Like running east on that stage, as I suggested." Isaiah smiled slightly at the memory of their first real conversation. "Perhaps," she returned the smile. "Though I suspect any path I chose would have led to its own battles. Women have few easy options in this territory." "True enough," Isaiah acknowledged, "though you've shown remarkable skill in navigating the ones you have." "Survival isn't a skill, it's a necessity," Zara replied. "My mother taught me that, though she couldn't follow her own wisdom." Her expression sobered. "I wrote to her last week. My father has taken to gambling again, worse than before. The money Barnaby paid for our marriage is nearly gone." I'm sorry, Isaiah said sincerely. That must be difficult, being unable to help them directly. For now, she agreed, but eventually, she trailed off, then shook her head. No, I won't speak of that. It feels like tempting fate. Isaiah understood her reluctance to discuss Barnaby's inevitable death and her subsequent freedom to manage the ranch and its assets as she saw fit. However practical such planning might be, voicing it felt dangerously close to wishing for the old man's passing. The aspens are just over that rise, he said, changing the subject. The view is worth the climb. They urged their horses up the gentle slope, emerging at the top to a vista that never failed to take Isaiah's breath away. The north pasture spread below them, grasslands giving way to a sweep of aspen groves that climbed the lower slopes of the distant mountains. The trees were indeed turning, their leaves shimmering gold and amber in the morning light, creating a gilded tapestry against the dark green of the pines beyond. Oh, Zara breathed, reining her horse to a halt. It's magnificent. Best view on the ranch, Isaiah agreed, pleased by her genuine appreciation. Many who came west saw only the harshness of the landscape, the challenges, the dangers, the isolation. Few paused to recognize its austere beauty, its moments of breathtaking splendor. They dismounted, leading their horses to a small grove of aspens, where a fallen log provided a natural seat overlooking the valley. Sitting side by side, close but not touching, they absorbed the peaceful panorama in companionable silence. I can see why you've stayed, Zara said after a while, despite your history of moving on. This land gets under your skin, doesn't it? It does, Isaiah admitted, though the land is only part of it. The admission slipped out before he could check it, too honest, too revealing of the other reasons he had remained at Rawlings Ranch far longer than intended. Reasons that had increasingly less to do with horses or wages and more to do with the woman sitting beside him. Zara turned to look at him directly, her blue eyes searching his face. Isaiah. We should be careful, he interrupted gently, about what we say, what we acknowledge. Because I'm a married woman, a sad smile touched her lips. Or because you're still determined to keep your distance from anything that might matter too much. The perceptive question struck uncomfortably close to truth. Both, he admitted. And because whatever exists between us, this understanding, it can't lead anywhere good while circumstances remain as they are. You mean while Barnaby lives, she said quietly. Yes, Isaiah met her gaze directly. I respect you too much to ask you to compromise your principles, and I respect myself too much to become the kind of man who would. Zara nodded, her expression both resigned and appreciative of his honesty. So we continue as we have been, careful, proper, acknowledging nothing. For now, Isaiah said, the two words holding both a boundary and a promise. Some paths can only be walked when the time is right. And if that time never comes, she challenged softly. If Barnaby defies the doctors again and again, if Victoria finds some other way to undermine me, if circumstances never align to make that path available. The questions hung between them, impossible to answer definitively, yet too important to dismiss. Isaiah considered carefully before responding. Then we will have acted with honor, he said finally, and whatever connection exists between us, whatever understanding we share, will remain untarnished by regret or shame. Zara studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Honor is a luxury many can't afford in this territory, she observed. Yet you hold to it without compromise. Not without compromise, Isaiah corrected, just without surrendering its essential core. There are lines I won't cross, that's all. And that's why she stopped herself, looking away toward the golden aspens. That's why your friendship has been so valuable these difficult months. The careful rephrasing didn't disguise what she had nearly said, and the unspoken words hung in the air between them, acknowledged yet deliberately left unclaimed. We should head back, Isaiah said after a moment, rising from the log. People will wonder if we're gone too long. Of course, Zara stood, brushing her skirt smooth with composed movements that belied the emotional current running beneath their conversation. Thank you for accompanying me, Mr. Cooper. The view was indeed worth the ride. The return to formality signaled her acceptance of the boundaries they had just reaffirmed. As they mounted their horses and began the ride back to the ranch, Isaiah felt both relief and a peculiar sense of loss. They had said both too much and not enough, acknowledging the connection between them while simultaneously agreeing it could not be pursued. It was the honorable choice, the right choice given their circumstances. Yet as they rode side by side through the autumn landscape, Isaiah couldn't help wondering whether honor alone would be enough to sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Winter came early to Wyoming that year, the first heavy snow falling in late October, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Barnaby Rawlings, who had defied the doctor's predictions for months, finally began the decline everyone had expected since spring. As temperatures dropped, his breathing worsened, the consumption that had been temporarily held at bay gaining ground with every passing week. Zara's careful nursing continued, but even her diligence could not reverse the inevitable progression. By December, Barnaby rarely left his bed, his once commanding voice reduced to a whisper, his frame wasted to skin stretched over bone. Yet his mind remained sharp, his awareness of ranch operations maintained through Zara's daily reports and Frank Weber's occasional visits. The Rawlings sisters returned as their brother weakened, but with less belligerence than before. The failed attempt to have Barnaby declared incompetent had apparently taught them caution, and Victoria's interactions with Zara took on a coldly civil tone that, while lacking warmth, at least avoided open hostility. For Isaiah, the winter months brought a strange, suspended quality to life at the ranch. Work continued, horses needed care regardless of weather, and preparations for spring breeding required constant attention. But beneath the routine lay the awareness that everything could change at any moment. When the end finally came, it was on a bitter January night, snow piling against the windows of the main house as wind howled across the valley. Isaiah was in the stables, checking on a pregnant mare showing signs of early labor, when Jimmy burst through the door, face red with cold and exertion. "Cooper, Mr. Weber says to come quick." "The boss, he's going." Isaiah's heart thumped heavily in his chest. "Barnaby." "Fading fast, Doc's been called but won't make it through the storm. Mrs. Rawlings is with him." Isaiah grabbed his coat and followed Jimmy into the howling darkness, snow stinging his face as they made their way to the main house. Inside, an unusual silence hung over the great room, broken only by the crackle of the fire and hushed voices from Barnaby's bedroom. Frank Weber stood near the doorway, his weathered face grave. "Cooper," he acknowledged with a nod. "Thought you should be here. He's asking for the senior hands." Inside the bedroom, lamplight cast a warm glow that contrasted with the solemnity of the scene. Barnaby lay propped against pillows, his breathing labored but his eyes clear and alert. Zara sat beside him, one hand holding his, the other gently wiping his forehead with a damp cloth. Victoria and her sisters huddled on the opposite side of the bed, their expressions a complex mixture of genuine grief and barely concealed calculation. "Cooper," Barnaby wheezed, his voice barely audible. "Good. Wanted you here." Isaiah moved to the foot of the bed, uncomfortable but determined to show proper respect to the dying man. "Mr. Rawlings." "My horses," Barnaby managed between gasping breaths. "You'll see to them." "Promise me." "I promise, sir," Isaiah said, touched by the rancher's concern for his prized breeding stock even in his final hours. Barnaby's gaze shifted to Weber. "Frank, you'll stay on." "Help her." "Course I will, boss," the foreman assured him. "Won't leave Mrs. Rawlings in the lurch." A ghost of satisfaction crossed Barnaby's gaunt face. He turned to Zara, his skeletal hand tightening slightly around hers. "You'll be all right, strong woman, picked well." "Rest, Barnaby," Zara said softly, her composure remarkable despite the emotional weight of the moment. "Save your strength." "No need," he wheezed. "Time's up." "But I beat them, didn't I?" His eyes flicked toward his sisters. "Outlasted their patience." Victoria made a sound of protest. "Barnaby, please, this is hardly the time for." "My time," he cut her off with surprising strength. "My house, my wife." His breathing grew more labored, each word clearly costing him dearly. "My will, all settled." The declaration hung in the air, significant in its simplicity. Barnaby Rawlings, controlling to the last, was making sure everyone understood that his affairs were arranged precisely as he wished, and that those arrangements would not be easily challenged. He began to cough then, a terrible rattling sound that shook his entire frame. Zara supported him through the spasm, her movements gentle but efficient as she helped him clear his lungs. When the coughing subsided, Barnaby sank back against the pillows, clearly exhausted by the effort. Leave us, he whispered to the room at large. Just my wife now. Victoria started to object, but Weber moved firmly to the door, gesturing for everyone to comply with what might be Barnaby's final request. Isaiah followed the others out, closing the door softly behind them. In the great room, the awkward tableau continued. The sisters huddled near the fire, Weber standing by the window watching the snow, Isaiah and Jimmy unsure of their place in this moment of family transition. Minutes stretched into an hour, the silence broken only by occasional murmured conversations quickly exhausted. Finally, the bedroom door opened. Zara emerged, her face pale but composed, her eyes dry though reddened with strain. "My husband is gone," she said simply. "He passed peacefully just a few minutes ago." Victoria moved first, pushing past Zara into the bedroom to see for herself, her sisters following close behind. Weber crossed to Zara, placing a weathered hand briefly on her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rawlings," he said with genuine feeling. He was a hard man but a fair one. "Thank you, mister." Weber, Zara's voice was steady despite her evident exhaustion. "Would you be kind enough to inform the hands, and we'll need to prepare a message for town, though it can't be delivered until the storm passes." "I'll see to it," Weber promised, gesturing for Jimmy to follow him. Left alone with Isaiah in the great room, Zara's careful composure wavered slightly. She swayed on her feet, the long hours of vigilance and the emotional toll of Barnaby's passing finally catching up with her. Isaiah moved quickly to her side, guiding her to a chair near the fire. "Sit before you fall," he said gently. "You've been up for days." "So much to do," she murmured, allowing herself to be seated. "Arrangements, notifications, the sisters." "Can wait," Isaiah finished firmly. "Everything can wait until morning." "You need rest, Zara." The use of her first name, something he had carefully avoided in recent months, seemed to penetrate her exhaustion. She looked up at him, blue eyes clouded with fatigue but still sharp with awareness. "He knew," she said quietly. "At the end, he thanked me for not being what Victoria had claimed, an opportunist waiting for him to die, said I'd earned everything coming to me." Isaiah knelt beside her chair, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard by the sisters in the bedroom. "He was right, you cared for him faithfully, kept him alive months longer than anyone expected. There's no shame in receiving what he chose to give you in return." "I know," Zara agreed, "yet I can't help feeling relieved." "And that relief brings guilt." She closed her eyes briefly. "Is it wrong to feel liberated by death, Isaiah, even when that death was expected, even merciful in the end?" "No," he said honestly, "it's human. Barnaby's suffering is over. And yes, your circumstances have changed. There's no dishonor in acknowledging that reality." She nodded, some of the tension easing from her shoulders at his understanding. Before she could respond further, Victoria emerged from the bedroom, her expression tightly controlled. "The storm makes immediate arrangements impossible," she said, addressing Zara with cold formality. "We will have to wait until morning to send for the undertaker and notify the appropriate parties." "Yes," Zara agreed, rising from the chair with renewed composure. "Mr. Weber is informing the hands. Once the storm clears, we'll send riders to town and to the neighboring ranches." "I assume my brother discussed his wishes for burial," Victoria's tone suggested doubt. "He did," Zara confirmed. "He wanted a simple service here at the ranch, in the family plot beside his first wife. Judge Peterson has the details, as does Mr. Cranston at the bank." She met Victoria's gaze directly. "All properly documented and witnessed." The information and its implication that Barnaby had indeed made thorough legal preparations seemed to deflate some of Victoria's brewing challenge. "I see," she said stiffly. "Well, as his closest blood relatives, my sisters and I naturally expect to be consulted on all arrangements." "Of course," Zara agreed with perfect politeness, as Barnaby would have wanted. The exchange, civil on the surface but charged with underlying tensions, set the tone for what Isaiah suspected would be the pattern of interactions in the days to come. The battle for control of the Rawlings legacy had entered a new phase, less direct than Victoria's earlier attempt at legal intervention, but no less determined. "Mr. Cooper," Zara turned to him with formal courtesy, "would you be kind enough to check on the hands in the bunkhouse? They should know that while ranch operations will naturally be affected by Mr. Rawlings's passing, their positions are secure." The request, practical on the surface, reassuring to the ranch workers in an uncertain moment, also served to remove Isaiah from the increasingly tense atmosphere of the main house. He recognized and appreciated Zara's strategic thinking, even in her grief and exhaustion. "Of course, Mrs. Rawlings," he replied with equal formality, "and please accept my condolences on your loss." As he donned his coat and stepped back into the snowy night, Isaiah felt the weight of the changing dynamics settling over the ranch. Barnaby Rawlings, the force that had built this empire, the man whose will had shaped everything from the breeding program to the placement of fence posts, was gone. In his place stood Zara, 23 years old, widowed after less than a year of marriage, now presumably the owner of one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. The sisters would fight her claim, of course. Victoria had too much invested in her belief that Barnaby's fortune should remain within blood family to accept disinheritance without a battle. The coming days would reveal the strength of whatever legal arrangements Barnaby had put in place to protect his young widow. But as Isaiah made his way through the drifting snow toward the bunkhouse, he found himself unexpectedly confident in Zara's ability to weather whatever challenges emerged. She had proven her resilience repeatedly since arriving at the ranch, learning ranch operations, managing Barnaby's care, deflecting Victoria's power grab. Now, with Barnaby gone and her formal period of mourning beginning, Zara would face her greatest test yet. Establishing her authority as the new owner of Rawlings Ranch in a territory where women rarely held such power. And Isaiah Cooper, who had spent years avoiding commitment to people or places, found himself unwilling to leave before seeing how that challenge unfolded. Word of Barnaby Rawlings's death spread quickly across the territory once the storm cleared, bringing an influx of visitors to the ranch, neighboring ranchers paying respects, business associates confirming arrangements, distant relatives emerging to claim connection to the Rawlings legacy. Through it all, Zara maintained perfect composure, receiving guests with dignified grief, directing funeral preparations with quiet efficiency. The sisters remained at the ranch, ostensibly to assist with arrangements but clearly monitoring Zara's every move, questioning her decisions with thinly veiled challenges to her authority. Yet to everyone's surprise, perhaps even her own, Zara held firm, deferring when appropriate but standing her ground on matters of substance. 3 days after Barnaby's death, the reading of the will took place in the great room of the main house. Judge Peterson presided, with Theodore Cranston, the banker, and Preston, the lawyer Victoria had previously engaged, in attendance. The hands were not invited to this family business, but Isaiah later heard the details from Frank Weber, who had been included as the ranch foreman. Simple and direct, Weber reported to Isaiah that evening as they shared coffee outside the bunkhouse. Old man knew exactly what he was doing, left the sisters their childhood home in town and a modest annual income, enough to live comfortably but not extravagantly. Everything else, the ranch, the cattle, the breeding stock, the investments in the railroad, all goes to Mrs. Rawlings. And the sisters' reaction, Isaiah asked, though he could well imagine. Weber snorted. Victoria looked like she'd swallowed a toad. Started in immediately about undue influence and questionable mental capacity, but that lawyer of hers shut her down quick. Turns out Barnaby had the will drawn up by Judge Peterson himself, with Dr. Miller from town certifying his soundness of mind, ironclad. So Zara, Mrs. Rawlings, now owns everything, Isaiah clarified, the implications settling over him. Lock, stock, and barrel, Weber confirmed, and that's not all. There was a letter, private instructions from Barnaby to his widow. Don't know what it said, but she read it there in front of everyone, and when she finished, she looked different, stronger somehow. More certain. Isaiah wondered about the contents of that letter, what final guidance or perhaps permission Barnaby might have given Zara. Whatever it contained, it seemed to have reinforced her position in her own mind, giving her additional confidence for the battles ahead. The funeral took place the following day, a cold, clear January morning, the sun glinting off snow-covered pastures as a procession of wagons and riders made their way to the small family cemetery on a rise overlooking the ranch. Barnaby was laid to rest beside his first wife, as he had requested, with Reverend Mitchell from town presiding over a service that emphasized the rancher's contributions to the territory's development while glossing over his more controversial qualities. Zara stood at the graveside in plain black mourning clothes, her honey-blonde hair hidden beneath a dark veil, her composure perfect throughout the service. The sisters arrayed themselves opposite her, their grief more visibly displayed in Victoria's case, more subdued in her younger siblings. Isaiah, attending with the other senior hands, watched the tableau with interest, noting the whispered observations among the assembled ranchers and townspeople, the speculative glances toward the young widow now presumed to control the Rawlings fortune. After the service, guests returned to the main house for the traditional gathering. Isaiah remained at the periphery, observing as Zara moved among the mourners with quiet dignity, accepting condolences and deflecting the inevitable questions about her plans for the ranch with noncommittal responses that revealed her diplomatic skill. "She handles herself well," Theodore Cranston observed, appearing beside Isaiah with a glass of whiskey in hand. The banker's expression was one of professional appraisal. Barnaby chose better than anyone gave him credit for. "She understands the accounts as well as he did, perhaps better in some regards." "She's had to," Isaiah replied, keeping his voice low. "She's been running the place in all but name for 3 months. "Indeed," Cranston took a sip of his drink. "There will be pressure on her to sell, of course. A woman alone running an operation of this size, the sharks will circle. The sisters are already suggesting that liquidation is the only sensible course." "And what does Mrs. Rawlings say?" "She says the Rawlings Ranch is not for sale, at any price." Cranston smiled faintly. "I believe she intends to expand the herd next spring. She asked me about loan rates for purchasing the adjacent Miller property." Isaiah looked across the room at Zara. She was listening to a neighboring rancher, her head tilted attentively, but her eyes were scanning the room, missing nothing. She looked regal in her mourning black, not a grieving widow lost in sorrow, but a queen surveying her kingdom. The confrontation everyone had been expecting came as the reception wound down. Victoria, having held her tongue through the service and the meal, finally reached the limit of her endurance. As the last of the neighbors departed, leaving only the household staff, the lawyer and the banker, she marched up to Zara, who was instructing Mrs. Winslow on the cleanup. "You can stop giving orders," Victoria snapped, her voice shrill in the suddenly quiet room. "The charade is over. Barnaby is dead, and we all know this will never hold up in court. Undue influence, coercion, will tie this estate up in litigation for years before we let you take a penny." Zara turned slowly. She didn't look flustered or frightened. She looked bored. "You are welcome to try, Victoria," she said calmly. "Mr. Preston has explained the terms of the will, Mr. Cranston holds the accounts, and Judge Peterson has already ruled on Barnaby's competence. But if you wish to spend your inheritance on legal fees fighting a battle you have already lost, that is your choice." "My inheritance," Victoria scoffed. "The pittance he left us, it's an insult." "It is an allowance," Zara corrected. "Generous enough for comfort provided you live within your means. However," she paused, allowing the silence to stretch, "the will contains a clause regarding challenges. Any beneficiary who contests the will forfeits their bequest entirely." Victoria paled, looking sharply at her lawyer. Preston cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "It is a standard clause, Mrs. Hargrove, called an interim clause. Given the judge's involvement in drafting the document, it is likely to be enforced." "So you have a choice," Zara continued, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. "You can accept your brother's final wishes, return to your homes, and live comfortably. Or you can fight me, lose everything, and explain to your children why their inheritance was squandered on your pride." She took a step closer to her sister-in-law. "But understand this, Victoria, I am not the frightened girl you met in prosperity. I have earned my place here. I nursed your brother when you ignored him. I managed his business when you only wanted his money. This ranch is mine. And I will defend it with every resource at my disposal." Victoria stared at her, mouth opening and closing as she sought a rebuttal. She looked at the lawyer, who shook his head slightly. She looked at the banker, who was studying his boots. And finally she looked at Zara, really looked at her, and saw the steel that Barnaby had recognized. The older woman's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of her, extinguished by the cold reality of her defeat. "When do we receive the first disbursement?" she asked, her voice tight. "Mr. Cranston will handle the schedule," Zara said dismissively. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have ranch business to attend to. Frank, Isaiah, would you join me in the study?" It was a dismissal, absolute and final. Victoria Hargrove, who had terrorized her family for decades, turned and walked away without another word. As Isaiah followed Zara and Weber into the study, he felt a strange mix of awe and unease. The transformation was complete. The merchant's daughter was gone. The cattle baroness had arrived. Zara walked behind Barnaby's massive oak desk and sat down. It should have dwarfed her, but instead she seemed to fill the space effortlessly. She gestured for them to sit. "The sisters are dealt with," she said, "all business. Now we look to the future. Frank, I want to proceed with the purchase of the Miller land. We need the water rights for the expansion." "Yes, ma'am," Weber said, grinning. "Barnaby always wanted that creek." "Barnaby was too cheap to pay Miller's price," Zara noted dryly. "I'm not pay him what he asks, but get the deed signed before winter." She turned her gaze to Isaiah. "And you, Mr. Cooper, the breeding program." "Yes, Mrs. Rawlings. Barnaby trusted your judgment implicitly." "So do I." She picked up a ledger. "I'm doubling the budget for new stock. I want you to go to Kentucky in the spring. Buy the best mares you can find. We're going to build the finest stable west of the Mississippi." Isaiah stared at her. It was a dream assignment, the kind of opportunity horsemen waited a lifetime for. "That's generous, ma'am." "It's an investment," she corrected. "I expect a return." Her professional mask slipped just for a second and her eyes softened. "And I need to know if you're staying. I know you plan to move on after Roundup." The question hung in the air. Staying meant working for a woman who had become one of the most powerful figures in the territory. It meant navigating the complex dynamic between them. It meant putting down roots in a place he had sworn to leave. Isaiah looked at the woman behind the desk. He saw the power she now wielded, yes. But he also saw the slight tremor in her hand as she held the pen, the shadow of fatigue under her eyes. She had won the war, but she was still alone in the castle. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Zara let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. "Good, that's good." Weber stood up, sensing the shift in the room. "I'll get started on those purchase orders, boss." He tipped his hat to Zara, a gesture of genuine respect, not just deference to her station, and left the room. Alone, the silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. "You were impressive out there," Isaiah said finally. Victoria looked ready to faint. "She's a bully," Zara said, setting down the pen. "Bullies only respect strength." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snowy yard where the mourners' carriages were departing. "They all thought I was a victim. My father, my brothers, Barnaby's sisters, even Barnaby at first. They thought they could use me." She turned to face him, the afternoon light catching the gold in her hair. "They forgot that when you force someone to survive, you teach them how to fight." Isaiah walked over to her. He stopped a respectful distance away, but the space between them felt charged. "You don't have to fight me, Zara," he said softly. "I know." Her shoulders relaxed. "You're the only one I don't have to fight. That's why I need you to stay, not just for the horses." "I know that too." He reached out, taking her hand. It was warm, strong, the hand of a woman who had held a dying man together and stared down a room full of enemies. "I'm not going to Kentucky just yet," he told her. "That can wait. Right now, you have a ranch to run. And you're going to need someone to watch your back." Zara smiled, and for the first time that day, it reached her eyes. "Is that an offer of protection, Mr. Cooper?" "It's an offer of partnership," he corrected. "If you'll have it." She squeezed his hand. "I think that's exactly what I need." 5 years later, the spring mud had finally dried, leaving the Wyoming roads passable for the steady stream of visitors making their way to the Rawlings-Cooper wedding. It was the social event of the decade. The governor was attending. The cattle barons from as far as Montana had sent gifts. Even Zara's mother and sister were there, having been moved out of prosperity and installed in a comfortable cottage on the ranch grounds 2 years prior, Zara's first act of true independence after securing her inheritance. Her father and brothers were notably absent, having been bought off with a final, modest sum and a warning from the sheriff never to return to the territory. Zara stood before the mirror in the master bedroom of the expanded ranch house. She wore cream silk this time, not the somber dress of her first wedding. She looked older, the girl of 22 replaced by a woman of 27 who commanded respect from the state line to the Tetons. "You look beautiful," her sister Mary said, adjusting the veil. "Are you nervous?" "No," Zara said, smiling at her reflection. "I've never been less nervous in my life." She walked out to the porch, where the ceremony was to be held. The yard was packed. There in the front row sat Theodore Cranston and Judge Peterson, both looking smugly satisfied with the union they had long predicted. And there, standing at the altar with Frank Weber beside him, was Isaiah. He looked uncomfortable in his formal suit, tugging slightly at his collar, but when he saw her, his hand stilled. His eyes, those pine-green eyes that had seen her when she was invisible, locked onto hers with a look of such profound love and pride that it took her breath away. Zara walked down the aisle not as a sacrifice but as a conqueror. She had survived the wolves, she had outlasted the tyrant, she had built an empire from the ashes of her servitude. But as she took Isaiah's hand, she knew that her greatest victory wasn't the land, or the money, or the power that made her enemies bow. It was the freedom to choose the man standing beside her. "Ready?" Isaiah whispered, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Zara looked out at the vast, beautiful land that was hers, then she looked up at the man who was her home. "I've been ready my entire life," she said.